Hello friends, glad to see you again on the Dead Signal FM channel. There are more and more of you. Thank you for watching our stories. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and subscribe so you won't miss new episodes. It really helps my channel. Also, write in the comments, where are you watching us from? Let's begin. Enjoy the video. The first time I heard my name whispered through the static of the weather radio, I dismissed it as exhaustion. 3 days alone at Blackwater Fire Lookout will do that to you. Trick your mind into hearing things that aren't there. The isolation plays games, especially when fog smothers the observation tower like a burial shroud, obscuring the dense pine forests of the Olympic Peninsula below. Daniel! I jerked upright from my logbook. The radio crackled, its green power light blinking lazily in the dimness of my small circular workspace. I stared at it, waiting. Nothing but the soft hiss of atmospheric interference. Outside, the late September mist pressed against the windows, transforming the panoramic views into walls of impenetrable gray. I'd been stationed here for less than 72 hours, taking over for Randall, the regular lookout who had been abruptly reassigned mid-season. The Park Service had been vague about his departure. Emergency family matters, they'd said. I didn't question it. The temporary position offered an escape I desperately needed after Kate's death, and the salary would help with the mounting medical bills that remained. 3 weeks alone with nothing but mountains, trees, and sky. A chance to breathe without the suffocating sympathy of friends who didn't know what to say anymore. I adjusted the radio's frequency, scanning for the scheduled check-in from headquarters that was now 20 minutes late. Instead of a voice, I heard only a strange, rhythmic tapping, like fingernails on glass. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. My eyes darted to the window where the sound seemed to originate, but the fog revealed nothing. The tapping stopped the moment I looked. I made a note in the logbook. 1645, possible woodpecker or branch against glass. Weather, heavy fog, visibility less than 10 feet, temp 48 degrees Fahrenheit. Practical explanations. That's what I needed. I'd seen what obsession with the unexplainable had done to Kate in her final months. Her desperate belief that something was following her, watching her, whispering to her as the cancer ate away her brain. I wouldn't follow her down that road. Night fell early at this elevation. By 7 p.m., the fog had transformed into a steady, hissing rain that drummed against the metal roof. I warmed a can of beef stew on the small propane stove, ate without tasting it, and tried to lose myself in my dog-eared copy of Steinbeck. But the words swam on the page, my concentration fractured by the occasional creak of the tower shifting in the wind and that persistent feeling of being watched. In the narrow cot, I dreamed of Kate. In the dream, she stood at the edge of the observation deck, her back to me, hair dancing in the wind. When she turned, her face wasn't hers anymore. Hollowed out, eyes like black pits, mouth stretched in an unnatural grin. "It followed me here, Danny," she said, her voice thick with something viscous. "And now it's found you." I woke gasping, sheets damp with sweat despite the chill. The digital clock read 3:17 a.m. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt like pressure against my eardrums. Then, from somewhere below me, inside the tower, came the unmistakable sound of footsteps on the metal spiral staircase. Slow, deliberate. Clang. Pause. Clang. Pause. Nobody else should be here. The nearest ranger station was 18 miles away, and I had the only set of keys. I reached for my flashlight and the bear spray I kept beside the bed, heart hammering against my ribs. "Hello," I called out, my voice embarrassingly thin. "This is a restricted area." The footsteps stopped. 1 heartbeat, 2. Then, directly outside my door, scratch, 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 like nails or claws dragging across the wood. I lunged for the door, yanking it open, spray raised. The narrow landing was empty. The spiral staircase descended into darkness. I played my flashlight beam down its length, illuminating nothing but metal steps disappearing into the shadows of the lower level. No footprints marred the fine layer of dust on the steps. Impossible for anyone to have climbed without leaving traces. Sleep evaded me for the remainder of the night. I sat with my back against the wall, flashlight and bear spray in hand, watching the door until dawn gradually illuminated the tower. The fog had retreated just enough to reveal the skeletal tops of nearby pines, their needles dripping with condensation. In that murky half-light, I convinced myself that last night had been nothing but a particularly vivid nightmare. That rationalization lasted until I descended to the lower level to use the small bathroom. There, scrawled in the condensation on the mirror, was a single word: Kate. I stared at it, blood rushing in my ears. My hand trembled as I reached out, fingers hovering over the letters. The glass felt ice-cold beneath my fingertips as I smeared away her name. Somewhere in the tower, the weather radio crackled to life, broadcasting nothing but static and, buried beneath it, what sounded like distant, distorted laughter. That was the beginning, the moment everything changed. By day 5, I'd convinced myself I was suffering from carbon monoxide poisoning. It was the only explanation for the escalating phenomena. The constant whispering from the radio, the indentations that appeared on my bed as if someone invisible sat watching me sleep, the objects that weren't where I'd left them. I checked the small detector. Its LED glowed a reassuring green. No poisonous gas was causing my hallucinations. I radioed headquarters during the scheduled check-in, keeping my voice steady as I reported the weather conditions, omitting any mention of footsteps in the night or names written in fog. They didn't need to know I was losing my grip on reality. They didn't need another Randall. Any word on when Randall will be back? I asked casually. The brief silence that followed stretched uncomfortably before dispatch responded. There's no update on that situation, Daniel. Just focus on your duties for now. You've got another 16 days. I wanted to press further, to ask what situation they were referring to, but the transmission ended with a finality that discouraged follow-up questions. That night, I found the logbook, Randall's logbook. It had appeared on my desk while I was outside checking the rain gauge, though I'd never seen it before. The official log I'd been using was still there, but this was something different, personal, filled with increasingly frantic handwriting. August 28th, third night of whispering from the radio. Always stops when I try to record it. Temperature dropped 30 degrees in the north corner for 20 minutes tonight. September 1st, found scratches on inside of door. Something trying to get out? Haven't slept more than 2 hours at a time in days. September 5th, IT knows my daughter's name. Said Emily over and over for an hour. Headquarters doesn't believe me. Says I need rest. September 8th, found the photos under the floorboard. God help me, this has happened before. The entries ended there. I flipped through the remaining pages, but they were blank. What photos? What floorboard? I began searching, tapping the planks with my flashlight handle, listening for hollow spots. In the northwest corner, beneath the small desk, I found it. A loose board that shifted under pressure. My fingers trembled as I pried it up. The space beneath contained a metal box, rusted at the edges. Inside were photographs, black and white, dating back decades based on the clothing styles. Different people, different faces, but all the same tower. All with the same thing lurking at the edges. I squinted at the nearest image, a man from perhaps the 1950s standing proudly on the observation deck. Behind him, partially obscured by shadow, was a figure, not quite human, elongated limbs, head tilted at an impossible angle. I grabbed another photo, a woman from what looked like the 1970s, smiling tensely inside the tower. In the window reflection behind her, the same distorted silhouette. Photo after photo, different decades, different lookouts, same presence. The final image made my blood freeze. It showed Randall, his face gaunt with exhaustion and fear, staring directly at the camera. Written on the back in shaky handwriting, "It gets inside you through the dreams. Don't sleep." The lights flickered once, twice, then plunged the tower into darkness. The weather radio burst to life, static rising to a painful volume. Through it came a voice that was not Kate's, not Randall's, but somehow both and neither. "Daniel, we've been waiting for you." The temperature plummeted. My breath clouded before me as something heavy dragged itself up the spiral staircase. Clang, scrape, Clang. Scrape. I scrambled for the bear spray, for the flashlight, anything to defend myself. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows like a living thing, tendrils of mist seeping through imperceptible cracks. The door to the stairwell swung open with a long, agonized creak. Nothing stood in the doorway, nothing visible at least, but I felt it. A presence that sucked the air from the room, that pressed against my skin like ice water. The whispering grew louder, no longer coming from the radio but from everywhere at once. A chorus of voices speaking words I couldn't understand. On the desk, the logbook flipped open, pages turning by themselves until they stopped on a blank page. Before my eyes, words began to appear, scratched into the paper by an invisible hand. Your turn, your turn, your turn, your turn. I ran, grabbed my jacket and the box of photos and fled down the stairs, taking them two at a time, certain I felt cold fingers brushing the nape of my neck. Outside, the fog swallowed me whole. I had no flashlight, no trail markers, just blind panic propelling me down the mountain path. Behind me, impossibly, I heard Kate's laughter. That specific, joy-filled sound I'd thought I'd never hear again, now twisted into something mocking and hollow. I ran faster, branches whipping my face, roots threatening to send me tumbling down the steep incline. I don't know how long I ran. Time lost meaning in the fog. But eventually, my foot caught on an exposed root, and I pitched forward, tumbling down a steep embankment. Pain exploded in my head, my vision swimming with black spots. As consciousness faded, I swore I saw a figure standing over me, limbs too long, head cocked at that impossible angle. I woke in an unfamiliar cabin, the scent of wood smoke and pine hanging in the air. An old man with leathery skin and eyes like pale stones watched me from a rocking chair. Found you half dead at the edge of my property, he said without preamble. You ran a hell of a long way from that tower. I tried to sit up, my head throbbing in protest. You know where I came from? Blackwater. Yeah. He nodded slowly. Been expecting someone to come running down sooner or later. Always do. He introduced himself as Garrett, a former maintenance worker for the Park Service who'd retired to this isolated cabin decades ago. As I sipped the bitter coffee he offered, he told me what the official records didn't: the history of disappearances, mental breakdowns, and deaths associated with Blackwater Fire Lookout. Started in '43, he said. First lookout was found hanging from the center beam. Next one walked into the woods in winter, never found more than his boots. Service keeps sending replacements, keeps covering it up. What is it? I asked, my mouth dry. What's up there? Garrett's eyes met mine. Nothing that should exist. Something that feeds on isolation and fear and grief. He nodded toward the metal box of photographs that had somehow stayed clutched in my grip throughout my desperate flight. You found Preston's collection. He was before my time, but he tried to document it. Drove him mad in the end. I opened the box, rifling through the photos again. Something caught my eye that I'd missed before. A pattern. In each image, the distorted figure grew clearer, closer to the human subject. In the final photos from each era, the figures had swapped positions. The entity in front, smiling wrong. The lookout now the shadow in the background, expression frozen in horror. It replaces them, I whispered. Garrett nodded grimly. Takes their shape, their memories, their grief. Is patient. Sometimes takes days, sometimes weeks. Randall. Wasn't Randall by the time they pulled him out, Garrett confirmed. Whatever came down that mountain wearing his face, it wasn't him anymore. They figured it out when it couldn't answer questions about his daughter. The real Emily died 20 years ago. My blood ran cold. And they still sent me up there, knowing what happened. Garrett's silence was answer enough. That night, I dreamed of the tower again. In the dream, I stood on the observation deck, watching the fog roll away to reveal the vast wilderness below. I felt powerful, hungry, ancient. When I turned to go inside, I caught my reflection in the glass. Elongated limbs, head tilted at an impossible angle. Kate's face stretched over features that were never meant to be human. I woke screaming, my body burning with fever. Garrett watched me with growing suspicion, keeping his distance. On the third day, when the fever broke, he asked me a question that made my heart stop. "Who's Kate?" I blinked at him. "My wife. She died 6 months ago. Cancer." His weathered face revealed nothing. "You've been calling for her in your sleep. Except last night, you weren't calling her name. You were answering to it." I spread through my veins. "What do you mean?" "You were having a conversation. Someone would whisper Kate. And you'd answer yes. Different voice. Higher. Wasn't yours." I stumbled to the small bathroom, hands shaking as I faced the spotted mirror above the sink. My reflection looked normal. Gaunt, pale, dark circles under my eyes, but my own face. I leaned closer, searching for any subtle wrongness, any hint that I wasn't alone behind my eyes. For a split second, just a flicker, I saw it. My head tilted at an angle my neck couldn't possibly achieve. A smile spreading too wide across my face, pupils expanding until my eyes were bottomless pools of darkness. Then it was gone, and it was just me again. Just Daniel, wasn't it? Garrett disappeared the next morning. His shotgun was missing from its place above the fireplace. I searched the woods around the cabin, calling his name until my voice gave out. He'd left no note, no explanation. Just a circle of salt around my bedroll that I'd somehow slept through him creating. I found his body 3 days later, half a mile up the mountain path that led back toward Blackwater Tower. The official cause of death was a heart attack, but I knew, from the expression of absolute terror frozen on his face, that he'd seen something in those final moments that had stopped his heart more effectively than any coronary thrombosis. I buried him behind his cabin, using a rusty shovel from his toolshed. As I patted down the last of the soil, I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me, of clarity. I knew what I had to do. The trek back to Blackwater took me most of a day. The fog had lifted, leaving behind a crystalline autumn day with visibility for miles. The tower gleamed in the sunlight, no longer menacing but welcoming. Waiting, my radio crackled as I approached. "Daniel? This is dispatch. We've been trying to reach you for days. What's your status?" I pressed the transmit button, Kate's laughter bubbling up my throat as I responded in my own voice. "All good here. Just some radio interference from the storm. Everything's under control now." "Roger that. We've got a replacement for you arriving next week. Park ranger in training. Young guy recently widowed. Name's Thomas. You okay to finish out your assignment and show him the ropes?" I smiled, watching my reflection in the tower window elongate and distort before settling back into the shape of Daniel. "I'll be waiting for him," I promised, my eyes flicking to the loose floorboard where the metal box now contained one additional photograph. Garrett's terrified face captured in perfect detail, though I'd taken no camera with me. "We'll take good care of him." As I climbed the spiral staircase, the metal steps rang hollow beneath my feet. Clang. Pause. Clang. Pause. The door to the observation room swung open at my approach, welcoming me home. Inside, the weather radio crackled with static and whispers. So many whispers now, a chorus of voices I recognized one by one. Randall, Preston, all the others who had come before. And Kate, always Kate. I settled into the chair at the desk, picked up the logbook, and began to write, my handwriting shifting subtly with each new line. Day 1. Found another one. Thomas arrives in 7 days. Poor Thomas, recently widowed. So much grief to feed upon. We're so hungry, and there's always room for one more in the tower. Always room for one more in the fog. I set down the pen and turned toward the window. From up here, I can see everything. The distant road where Thomas will arrive, the neighboring peaks, the valley below where search parties will eventually come looking when Thomas, too, files increasingly disturbing reports before going silent. I pressed my hand against the cold glass, watching 5 fingers elongate into something more like claws, bones stretching beneath skin that's no longer quite human. In the reflection, Kate smiles back at me with too many teeth. We wait. We are so very good at waiting, and the fog is rolling in again. The first time it happened, I thought it was the lake. That subtle shifting beneath my feet as I stood on the dock, staring out at the still water bathed in twilight. A gentle vibration, like something large moving deep below. But Lake Abernathy was never known for unusual currents, and the water lay flat as glass that evening, reflecting the bruised purple sky without a single ripple. I'd arrived at the ranger outpost 3 days earlier. The Forest Service had shuttered it years ago. Budget cuts, they said, but my research grant offered enough to rent it for the season. As an aquatic ecologist studying invasive species, I needed isolation. What better place than an abandoned monitoring station perched on stilts at the edge of a remote mountain lake, 40 miles from the nearest town? Perfect for focus, my advisor had said. You'll get that dissertation done in no time. She didn't mention the silence. Not peaceful silence, the crushing kind that makes your ears strain for any sound at all. The kind that feels like pressure building inside your skull until you catch yourself humming just to break it. The cabin itself was utilitarian. A main room combining kitchen and workplace, a small bedroom, and a bathroom with plumbing that complained loudly whenever used. Large windows faced the lake, designed for rangers to monitor water levels and boating activity. The structure creaked constantly on its weathered supports, with joints expanding and contracting with temperature changes. At least that's what I told myself the sounds were. That first night, exhausted from the drive and unloading equipment, I fell asleep instantly despite the unfamiliar surroundings. But on the second night, something woke me. A noise like fingernails tapping on glass. Top, top, top. Pause. Top, top, top. Half asleep, I assumed it was pine branches against a window, though I hadn't noticed any trees close enough to touch the building. When I drifted back to consciousness hours later, weak sunlight filtering through the blinds, I'd forgotten about it entirely, until I found the marks. 3 small, perfect circles etched into the window glass of my bedroom, arranged in a triangle. They weren't cracks, they were deliberate etchings, as if made by a diamond-tipped tool. I ran my finger over them. The glass was smooth, the marks somehow beneath the surface. Probably kids, I muttered to no one. Some bored teenagers who broke in here when it was abandoned. But as I prepared my coffee, a nagging thought persisted. The outpost was only accessible by a 5-mile dirt road that required 4-wheel drive and local knowledge to navigate. Not the kind of place bored teenagers would find. That afternoon, as I cataloged water samples on the dock, I heard my name, Daniel, clear as day, spoken directly behind me. I spun around, heart hammering. Nothing but the weathered boards of the outpost's exterior wall, the forest beyond silent and still. My coffee mug sat where I'd left it on the railing. "Hello," I called, my voice sounding thin and insubstantial in the open air. No answer except a distant bird call. I turned back to my samples, convincing myself it was just the wind playing tricks through the building's support beams. But wind doesn't know names. That evening, something changed about the cabin. Nothing I could pinpoint, just a feeling. The air seemed denser, the shadows deeper in the corners. As darkness fell, I found myself avoiding looking at the windows, feeling watched from the blackness beyond the glass. I was labeling specimens when my phone rang. The shrill tone made me jump, nearly dropping a vial of lake water. Cell service was spotty at best out here. I'd warned colleagues to email instead of calling. The screen showed unknown caller. "Hello," I answered. Nothing but a soft, rhythmic sound. In out, like breathing. "Who is this?" I demanded, a chill tracing my spine. The breathing continued for 3 more seconds, then stopped abruptly. Call ended. I tried to redial, but the phone showed no service. Typical. The signal came and went unpredictably out here. I placed the phone on the counter and returned to my work, ignoring how my hands trembled slightly. When my phone rang again 20 minutes later, I nearly knocked over my microscope lunging for it. Unknown caller again. This time I didn't speak, just listened. "Daniel," the same voice from the dock, now through my phone. A whisper, neither male nor female, with a wet quality to it, like someone speaking through fluid. "Look outside." The line went dead. Every instinct screamed not to look, but I found myself moving toward the window anyway. The night was moonless, the lake a void of absolute darkness. I pressed my face close to the glass, cupping my hands around my eyes to block the interior light. First, nothing. Then movement. A ripple on the lake's surface, moving against the breeze, creating a V pattern that pointed directly at the outpost. And me. I stumbled backward, heart pounding. As I reached for the light switch, the overhead bulb flickered once, twice, then went out. The backup generator should have kicked in immediately, but the cabin remained dark. In that darkness, I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. Not on glass this time, but on the wooden floor beneath me. 3 distinct taps, then silence. They came again, closer. Top, top, top. I fumbled for my phone's flashlight, illuminating the empty room. The tapping stopped. After a frantic check of the circuit breaker, I found nothing obviously wrong, but the power remained out. I lit the kerosene lantern I'd brought for emergencies and placed it on the table, its yellow glow creating more shadows than illumination. That night, I barricaded myself in the bedroom, pushing the heavy dresser against the door. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by what sounded like water dripping somewhere in the cabin, though all faucets were tightly closed, and the occasional creak that seemed to move from one side of the cabin to the other, as if someone were slowly pacing. Dawn brought relief and embarrassment. In daylight, my fears seemed foolish. Power outages were common in remote locations. The phone call could be explained by service glitches distorting a normal call. The tapping was just the building settling. I decided to focus on work. After a quick breakfast, I gathered equipment for deeper water samples and headed to the dock. That's when I noticed the footprints. Small, bare feet, child-sized, imprinted in the damp earth along the shore. They emerged from the water's edge and led directly to the stairs of the outpost, as if someone had walked out of the lake during the night. I followed them, pulse quickening. They ascended the steps, crossed the deck, and stopped at my door, none leading away. Inside, the cabin appeared untouched, but the air held an unfamiliar scent, organic and stagnant, like vegetation rotting underwater. I checked every corner, closet, and cabinet. Nothing. In the bathroom, I noticed the mirror had fogged over, despite the room being cold. Condensation beaded on its surface, running down in rivulets that resembled tears. As I watched, finger marks appeared in the fog, as if someone on the other side were touching the glass. I backed away, then ran outside, gasping in the clean mountain air. My mind raced through rational explanations. Temperature differences causing condensation, weird atmospheric conditions. Maybe I'd touched the mirror myself without realizing. But nothing explained what happened next. When I returned, shaky but determined, every container of water in the cabin, my drinking bottles, sample vials, even the toilet tank, had frozen solid. In August, the temperature inside read 72 degrees. I should have left then, packed my research and driven away, professional consequences be damned. Instead, curiosity overrode my fear, the scientist in me needing to understand, to document, to explain. That night, I set up my research camera on the kitchen counter. Its motion detector activated, lens pointed toward the main room. I placed audio recorders in each room. If something was happening, I would capture evidence. Sleep evaded me completely. I sat rigid in bed, listening to the intensifying sounds. No longer subtle creaks and taps, but decisive footsteps crossing the main room floor. Cabinet doors opening and closing. The squeak of my office chair as if someone sat down. All while the temperature plummeted until I could see my breath misting in the beam of my flashlight. At 3:17 a.m., my phone lit up with a text message. Unknown number. I was here before you. 3:18 a.m. I'm still beneath. 3:19 a.m. Look what I found. The final message contained an image, so dark I had to increase the brightness to maximum. It appeared to be a photograph of documents. My research papers, current notes I'd been working on that very day, spread across the kitchen table where I'd left them. In the background of the photo, barely visible, a figure standing in my bedroom doorway. The image quality was too poor to make out details, but it wasn't me. It was shorter, its proportions wrong, its head tilted at an impossible angle. A tremendous crash from the main room sent me bolting upright. Fighting every instinct to hide, I forced myself to investigate, flashlight trembling in my white-knuckled grip. My research, months of meticulous work, lay scattered across the floor. The table had been flipped over, its solid oak top splintered down the middle as if struck with enormous force. No human could have done that. But worse than the destruction was the discovery beneath the broken table. Weathered wooden boards that didn't match the rest of the flooring. A hidden trapdoor, now exposed, its rusty iron ring pull gleaming in my flashlight beam. I should not have opened it. God help me, I should never have looked. But I did. The smell hit me first. That same rotting vegetation odor, intensified 100-fold. The opening revealed not a storage cellar or crawl space, but water. Black water, absolutely still, filling a shaft that descended into darkness beneath the cabin. My flashlight beam penetrated only a few feet below the surface, revealing wooden support beams disappearing into the depths. The outpost hadn't been built beside the lake. It had been built over a section of it, concealing this vertical shaft. As I stared, transfixed, the water's surface trembled. Something was rising. I slammed the trapdoor shut and dragged the broken table over it, adding chairs and anything heavy I could find. Then I ran for my laptop, searching frantically through the digital archives I downloaded about Lake Abernathy. The information was buried in newspaper archives from 1963. A ranger had disappeared from this very outpost. His body never recovered. The official report cited accidental drowning. But there were rumors, allegations that he had been conducting unauthorized experiments, removing artifacts from indigenous burial sites along the shoreline. And before him, 3 children from a nearby logging camp had vanished while playing near this cove. Witnesses reported seeing them wading into the lake, as if following something beneath the surface. They never emerged. The Forest Service hadn't closed the outpost due to budget cuts. They'd sealed it after multiple staff reported voices, moving objects, and a presence that watched from the water. As I read, the barrier I'd created over the trapdoor began to shift. The table scraped across the floor, pushed from below with steady, inexorable pressure. Water seeped around the edges of the door, black and viscous. My phone rang, unknown caller. I answered without thinking. That wet voice whispered, "We're coming up now, Daniel." The call dropped as the power returned suddenly, all lights blazing at maximum brightness. In that harsh illumination, I saw water pouring from every faucet, the toilet, even the refrigerator ice dispenser. Black, foul-smelling water flowing upward, defying gravity. The trapdoor burst open with a sound like a thunderclap, the heavy furniture tossed aside like toys. Black water gushed upward in a powerful column, but instead of splashing down, it began to take shape. A vaguely humanoid form, but wrong in its proportions, with too many angles and bending in impossible directions. I ran. Out the door, across the deck, down the stairs toward my Jeep. The engine roared to life, tires spinning on gravel as I accelerated down the access road. In the rearview mirror, silhouetted against the blazing lights of the outpost, multiple figures stood on the dock. A tall, thin adult form, and beside it 3 smaller shapes, child-sized, all watching my retreat. All completely motionless except for their heads, which tilted in perfect unison at an identical, unnatural angle. I drove straight through until morning, not stopping until I reached the university. Babbling my story to campus security, then campus police, then the Forest Service Rangers who were called in. They found my fear convincing enough to send a team to investigate. The outpost was untouched.
No overturned furniture.
No broken table. No trapdoor. My research papers were neatly stacked where I usually kept them. The power worked perfectly. Water samples I'd collected sat undisturbed in their containers. The only unexplained elements, all electronic devices I'd left behind, camera, audio recorders, backup hard drive, were found submerged in the lake, 30 feet from shore. And despite it being a calm day, the surface above them rippled continuously, as if something moved back and forth below. They retrieved the devices, but the memory cards were corrupted, yielding nothing but distorted images of darkness and garbled audio of what might have been whispering. The Rangers' report cited wildlife intrusion, possible carbon monoxide exposure from the old heating system, and the psychological effects of isolation. Case closed. But I know what I experienced. I dream about it nightly, that black water rising, forming shapes that should not exist. I wake up to the sound of tap 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 on my bedroom window. My phone rings with no caller ID, delivering only the sound of water when I answer. Last week, I found 3 small, perfect circles etched into my bathroom mirror, arranged in a triangle. When I touch them, my fingers come away wet. The research team sent to continue my work reports nothing unusual at the outpost, but their communications have grown increasingly erratic. Their water samples show impossible results, organisms that shouldn't exist in a freshwater lake. In their last video call, I noticed their clothes were perpetually damp, their skin pallid. One researcher kept tilting her head at an unnatural angle while staring directly at the camera. They don't answer calls anymore. I've requested the Forest Service permanently seal the outpost, citing environmental hazards. They're reviewing my proposal, unconvinced by my vague explanations. Meanwhile, I've applied for a research position in Arizona. Somewhere dry, somewhere far from lakes and their secrets. But I know it doesn't matter how far I run. Some nights, I wake to find puddles of black water around my bed. My phone contains photos I never took. Images of darkness with pale figures barely visible, their elongated limbs reaching toward the camera. My bathroom mirror fogs over even in desert heat. And sometimes, when I'm drifting off to sleep, I hear that wet voice whisper my name, reminding me of what waits beneath the surface. What always finds its way up. What followed me home. It's calling me right now, from the bathroom sink, where the water has been running upward all evening, defying gravity, forming shapes in the air.
Top, top, top.
It's patient, and eventually I know I'll answer. The first time I heard it, I was adjusting the weather radio. 3 weeks into my new job as a fire lookout at Whispering Pine Station, I'd settled into a comfortable routine. The isolation didn't bother me. It was exactly what I needed after the divorce. Just me, miles of dense forest, and the occasional check-in with headquarters. That evening, a storm was brewing. Charcoal clouds churned overhead as I prepared for my nightly report. The old radio equipment sat on a wooden desk below the observation windows. Technology from another era, all knobs and dials and static. I twisted the frequency dial, searching for the weather channel, when something strange happened. Between stations, in that liminal space of white noise, I heard my name. Daniel. Just that. A whisper, almost inaudible beneath the static. I froze, finger still on the dial, listening. Nothing followed. I convinced myself it was just the wind, or my imagination playing tricks after too many solitary days. I completed my report and went to bed, dismissing the incident entirely, until it happened again the next night. Whispering Pines Station wasn't what most people picture when they think of a fire lookout. Not one of those romantic, elevated cabins with panoramic windows. This was older, more substantial, a Depression-era stone structure built atop a craggy ridge. The main floor contained the observation room, a kitchenette, and a small bathroom. A narrow staircase led to a cramped bedroom directly above. The basement housed the generator and ancient electrical systems. The previous lookout had departed mid-season without explanation. The Forest Service had been desperate to fill the position, which explained why they'd hired me despite my complete lack of experience. Just watch for smoke and call it in, my supervisor had said, his eyes not quite meeting mine during orientation. Weather reports twice daily. Otherwise, keep to yourself. He'd given me an odd look before driving away. The radio can get finicky up here. If you hear anything unusual, just ignore it. Atmospheric interference. I should have asked questions then, but I was too eager to disappear into the wilderness, to escape everything I'd left behind. On the third night, I heard my name again, clearer this time. Daniel, I see you. I jerked away from the radio, heart pounding. The voice was thin, distant, like someone speaking through layers of cloth. I switched off the radio immediately, my hands trembling. The station felt suddenly colder, the shadows deeper. "Hello," I called, feeling foolish. Only the wind answered, rattling the windows. I slept poorly that night, dreams filled with static and whispering voices. In the morning, I convinced myself it had been a stray radio signal, perhaps from a ham operator who'd somehow accessed this frequency. I decided to mention it during my morning report. "Headquarters, this is Whispering Pines. I'm getting some strange interference on the radio. Sounds like someone talking. Over." A long pause followed. Then, "What kind of interference exactly?" "Over." A voice, saying my name. "Over." Another pause, longer this time. When the response came, the usual friendly tone had vanished. "Whispering Pines, maintain your regular duties. Avoid unnecessary radio use. Do not attempt to communicate with or respond to any unidentified transmissions. Over and out." The abruptness of the sign-off left me staring at the radio. They knew something, and they weren't telling me. That afternoon, I noticed the first physical disturbance. I'd been on the observation deck, scanning the forest with binoculars, when I heard a thud from inside. I returned to find my coffee mug shattered on the floor, 15 feet from where I'd left it on the desk. I cleaned up the mess, trying to rationalize. The mug must have been perched precariously. Maybe a strong gust had somehow vibrated it off the desk. Despite these explanations, a creeping unease settled over me as evening approached. The station creaked and groaned as the temperature dropped. Normal sounds of an old building. I told myself this repeatedly as I prepared dinner, jumping at every pop and crack from the settling structure. At precisely 8:43 p.m., the lights flickered, once, twice, then stabilized. I glanced at the wind-up clock on the wall, its second hand trembling slightly as it moved. A moment later, the radio switched on by itself. Static poured from the speaker, but mixed with it was a sound like labored breathing. I stood frozen by the stove, wooden spoon dripping sauce onto the floor. "Daniel, come closer." The voice emerged from the static, raspy, genderless, and somehow wrong, as if the speaker struggled to form human speech. I approached the radio with leaden feet. "Who are you?" The static changed pitch, creating a sound unnervingly like laughter. "I've been here so long, waiting." "Waiting for what?" The radio went dead. Not just off, dead. The power light extinguished, the backup battery indicator dark. When I tried the power button, nothing happened. I unplugged it, checked the connections, plugged it back in. Nothing. My only communication with the outside world had failed. That night, I discovered the photographs. Unable to sleep, I decided to clean out the storage closet. Anything to keep my mind occupied. Behind a stack of old logbooks, I found a shoebox containing dozens of Polaroids. Each photo showed the same thing, the radio desk. Just the desk, the chair, the radio equipment. Some were taken during day, others at night. Nothing remarkable, except for one detail that sent ice water coursing through my veins. In each photo, the radio dial was set to the same frequency, 87.7 FM, a frequency that shouldn't exist on a weather radio, one between official stations. The final photo was different. It showed a man sitting at the desk, his back to the camera, head bent toward the radio. The image was blurry, as if he'd been moving when the photo was taken, or as if something else in the frame had been moving, creating a dark smudge behind him. I flipped the photo over. On the back, in shaky handwriting, "IT comes through the radio." That night, I barricaded my bedroom door with the dresser and slept with the station's lone fire axe beside me. I woke to find my breath visible in the bedroom's freezing air. The temperature had plummeted overnight, far colder than the autumn weather warranted. Every exhalation billowed like smoke in the pre-dawn darkness. The cold had a presence to it, dense, invasive, probing. It seemed to be searching for something. For me, I pulled the blankets tighter, watching my breath cloud above me, when a new sound penetrated the silence. From downstairs came a slow, persistent clicking, like someone turning the radio dial, station by station. Click, click, click. I knew I'd left the radio unplugged. The clicking stopped. In the sudden silence, I heard footsteps on the stairs, slow, dragging steps that made the old wood groan. I gripped the axe handle, eyes fixed on the door, watching the knob. It didn't turn. Instead, something brushed against the wood. A soft, scratching motion, as if someone were trailing their fingers across the surface. "Daniel?" came the whisper, not from beyond the door but from beside my bed. "You can't keep me out." I swung wildly with the axe, connecting with nothing but air. The voice laughed, a sound like radio interference and breaking glass. By morning, the coldness had receded, and with daylight came renewed skepticism. I must have dreamed it all. Sleep paralysis, perhaps, triggered by isolation and stress. The rational explanation comforted me as I went downstairs. The comfort vanished when I saw the radio. Plugged in, powered on, tuned to 87.7 FM. Static whispered from the speakers. Beside it sat my voice recorder, one I used for making observation notes. The play button had been pressed, the counter running. I rewound and listened. My own voice emerged from the tinny speaker, distorted and wrong, repeating in an endless loop. "Let me in, let me in, let me in, let me in." I tried to leave that day, packed my bag, locked up the station, and started down the service road toward the ranger station 15 miles away. I made it less than a mile before the weather changed. Fog rolled in with unnatural speed, thick as cotton and twice as disorienting. Within minutes, visibility dropped to mere feet. I continued forward, following the road by keeping to the center of the dirt path, but soon even that became impossible to discern. The fog wasn't just obscuring my vision, it was actively misleading me. Shapes appeared and disappeared at its edges. Sounds came from constantly shifting directions, breaking twigs, rustling leaves, and somewhere, a distant radio playing static. After an hour of walking, I emerged from the fog to find myself back at the station's front door, as if I'd walked in a perfect circle. The fog bank hung just beyond the clearing, a wall of white cutting me off from the world. I was trapped. That night, it escalated. I'd broken the radio, smashing it with the fire axe until it was unrecognizable scrap. I built a fire in the old stone fireplace, gathered every lamp and flashlight I could find, and created a circle of light in the center of the main room. No more darkness, no more corners where shadows could gather. At midnight, every light in the station went out simultaneously. The fire died as if a giant had blown it out. Even my flashlight, fresh batteries installed that morning, faded to a dim yellow glow before extinguishing completely. In the perfect darkness, I heard it coming. Not footsteps this time. A sliding, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the floor, circled me, around and around, always just beyond reach. I spun uselessly, straining to see in the absolute blackness. "What do you want?" I shouted. The movement stopped. The silence stretched, broken only by my ragged breathing. Then came the smell, ozone and decay, like electrical burning mixed with something long dead. The air pressure changed, my ears popping painfully as if I'd plunged deep underwater. A low hum began, vibrating through the floorboards and into my bones. "I want what he promised me," the voice said, now directly behind me. "A way out, a body. Yours will do." I dove forward, scrambling across the floor. My hand struck something, the fire axe. I seized it, swinging blindly as cold hands grabbed my ankles, dragging me backward across the floor. The axe connected with something that wasn't there and wasn't solid, like hitting fog or smoke, but with resistance. A shriek filled the room, piercing my eardrums with such intensity that I dropped the axe to cover my ears. The lights returned, flickering weakly. I was alone in the room, sprawled on the floor. But on the wall above the destroyed radio, something was changing. The stone was rippling, bulging outward as if something pushed from the other side. Not stone anymore, but a membrane, stretching thinner as I watched. Through it, I could make out a vague shape, humanoid but wrong, too angular, too fluid. With a whimper, I fled upstairs, locking myself in the bathroom, the only room without windows or a vent. I wedged the door shut with the toilet tank lid and huddled in the tub, shaking uncontrollably as the station came alive around me. Banging, scraping, thumping sounds filled the night. Furniture dragged across floors, glass shattered, and beneath it all, that voice, calling my name, sometimes whispering, sometimes screaming, but always closer. In the gray light of dawn, I emerged to find devastation. Every piece of furniture overturned, windows broken outward, as if something had escaped rather than broken in. The walls were covered in markings, not random destruction but deliberate symbols carved into the wood and stone, patterns that hurt my eyes to look at directly. In the center of the observation room lay my journal, open to a page filled with writing that wasn't mine. The same phrase, hundreds of times in increasingly frantic handwriting. The frequency is the door. The door is always open. The door is always open. The door is always open. I had to understand what was happening. With trembling hands, I dug through the station's files until I found what I was looking for. Personnel records. The previous lookout had been a man named Thomas Gale, an electrical engineer who'd sought the position after working for a radio research laboratory. The report on his disappearance was brief. He'd stopped making his scheduled radio checks. When rangers arrived, they found the station empty, the radio running static on 87.7 FM, and bizarre equipment connected to it. Amplifiers, modified speakers, custom circuit boards. They also found his journal, with entries describing his breakthrough. He'd discovered something on that frequency, something that existed between conventional radio waves, something that had been trying to communicate for a very long time. The final entry chilled me. It needs a physical anchor, a voice to speak through, a body to inhabit. I've promised to help it cross over. Tonight, we complete the circuit. Thomas was never found. That night, my final night at Whispering Pines, I set up a recorder and this account, hoping someone might find it and understand. The entity is growing stronger. The walls between us weaken. I've tried everything to escape, but the forest itself keeps returning me here. I know now what this place really is. Not just a fire lookout, but a junction point, a place where the barrier between frequencies is naturally thin. Thomas didn't discover the entity. He enhanced a doorway that was already here, one that had been opened many times before. The basement held the final clue, a false wall concealing a chamber cut directly into the bedrock. The room contained only a stone altar and petroglyphs showing figures gathered around a central pit, their hands raised toward something descending from above. This station was built on ruins of something much older, something constructed specifically to communicate with what waits between radio waves. I hear it coming now, not bothering with stealth anymore. The stairs creak beneath its weight, more solid than before, more real. The air crackles with static, and I smell ozone and burning hair. I'm left with only one option. The fire lookout was built of stone for a reason, to contain something, not to keep it out. There's a reason they staffed this place with isolated, broken people like me. We're not here to watch for fires. We're sacrifices. The door splinters. I see it clearly now, and I understand why Thomas went willingly. It's beautiful in its wrongness. A shifting, folding thing of angles and emptiness. Not malevolent, just hungry, lost, wanting to exist. As it reaches for me, I flip the recorder's switch. If you're hearing this, please destroy the station. Salt the earth. But most importantly, never, ever tune to 87.7 FM. The forgotten frequency is not forgotten. It's listening, always listening. And now it has my voice. End of recording. Whispering Pines Station burned to the foundation 3 days later. Official cause, lightning strike. This account was recovered from a damaged voice recorder found half-buried 300 yards from the site. The whereabouts of Daniel Sawyer remain unknown. I should have known something was wrong when my radio picked up the broadcast. 3 days into my stay at the decommissioned Blackwater Ridge Fire Lookout Tower, I'd settled into a comfortable routine. The isolation was precisely what I needed, 60 feet above the ground, surrounded by nothing but dense pine forest stretching for miles in every direction across the Montana wilderness. No cell service. No internet. Just me, my research notes, and the gentle hiss of static from my battery-powered radio that I'd tune occasionally, hoping to catch a weather report from the nearest station 70 miles away. That night, as fog rolled in thick enough to obscure everything beyond the railings of my observation deck, the static on my radio suddenly cleared. The clarity of the signal was startling, as if the broadcaster was right there in the room with me. But it wasn't music or a weather report that came through the speaker. It was a child's voice, soft and measured, reciting numbers. 87, 16, 42, 9. I froze, pen hovering above my notebook. The voice paused, then repeated the same sequence. I reached for the tuning dial, but before I could touch it, the voice stopped. The static returned, followed by silence. "Hello," I called out, feeling foolish immediately. The tower was 30 miles from the nearest road. I was completely alone. Then the voice returned, no longer reciting numbers. "Hello, Marcus." My name, my actual name, not my nickname, Mark, which everyone uses. Marcus, the name on my birth certificate that even my closest friends don't know. I yanked the batteries from the radio, my hands trembling so badly I dropped one. It rolled across the worn wooden floorboards, disappearing into a crack. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by my ragged breathing and the distant cry of a nighthawk. Sleep eluded me that night. I convinced myself it was some bizarre atmospheric anomaly, radio signals bouncing off the ionosphere, picking up a number station from Russia or Cuba. The voice saying my name was just my imagination, a trick of an exhausted mind. 3 days of solitude was already getting to me. Dawn brought clarity and rational thought. I laughed at my midnight fears as sunlight streamed through the windows of the hexagonal room that had been my home for 3 days and would remain so for 27 more. The lookout tower was Spartan but comfortable. A single room with windows on all sides, a small kitchenette, a desk for my research, a narrow bed, and shelves lined with books left by previous occupants, mostly wildlife guides and paperback westerns. I'd taken a sabbatical from the university to finish my book on forest ecology. The isolation was perfect for focused work, and the historical aspect of the tower, built in 1934, decommissioned in 1979, now maintained by the Forest Service as a rental for hikers and researchers, added a romantic quality to my academic pursuits. That second morning, I made coffee on the small propane stove and stepped out onto the observation deck. The fog had lifted, revealing the stunning vista of mountain ranges rippling to the horizon. No sign of humanity in any direction, just wilderness. I breathed deeply, feeling my anxiety dissolve, until I noticed the batteries. My radio batteries, which I'd removed the night before, were back in the device. The radio was turned on, tuned to static. I stood staring at it, coffee growing cold in my hands. Had I put them back in myself?
No, impossible.
I specifically remembered leaving them on the desk. One had rolled away, lost in the floorboards. With a nervous laugh, I turned off the radio and placed it in a drawer. Sleep deprivation was making me forgetful. I needed to focus on my work. The day passed uneventfully. I made good progress on my manuscript, stopping occasionally to scan the forest with the tower's mounted binoculars. I spotted a family of elk in a distant clearing, watched the methodical flight of a golden eagle, and noted the patterns of cloud shadows moving across the landscape. As dusk approached, the temperature dropped rapidly. I fired up the small wood stove in the center of the room, grateful for the previous occupant who had left a good supply of split logs. The warmth was comforting, and I found myself humming as I prepared a simple dinner of pasta and canned sauce. The sound of scratching interrupted my meal, faint but distinct, something scraping against the wooden exterior of the tower. I paused, fork halfway to my mouth, listening intently. It moved slowly around the perimeter, a deliberate sound like fingernails dragging across the weathered planks. Raccoon, I thought, or perhaps a pine marten. The tower was essentially a giant wooden pole. Wildlife attempting to climb it wasn't unusual. I returned to my meal, ignoring the sound until it stopped, until the scratching moved to the underside of the floor. I set my plate down, The tower was built on a concrete foundation, with the living quarters elevated 60 feet above the ground. Nothing could be beneath me except empty air. Yet the scratching continued, directly below my feet now, as if something was trying to claw its way up through the floorboards. I moved around the room, tracking the sound. Followed me. When I stopped, it stopped. When I took 3 steps toward the door, it scratched 3 times in rapid succession. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice sounding thin and unconvincing even to my own ears. The scratching stopped. For a moment, nothing but the gentle crackling of the wood stove and the wind whistling around the tower eaves. Then, from the drawer where I'd placed the radio, came a soft, rhythmic tapping. 1, 2, 3, 4. Pause. 1, 2, 3, 4. Heart hammering in my chest. I crossed the room and yanked open the drawer. The radio was gone. I tore through the small living space, searching every possible hiding place. No radio. I was certain I hadn't moved it. There was no explanation for its disappearance that didn't terrify me. The tapping sound continued, now coming from outside, from the observation deck. I hesitated before pushing open the door. Night had fallen completely, the darkness absolute except for my headlamp beam. The deck was empty, but the tapping continued, now seeming to emanate from the metal roof above. I retreated inside, double-checking the locks on the door and windows. The rational part of my brain suggested wildlife, thermal expansion of the metal roof, or wind causing the strange noises. But nothing explained the missing radio or the batteries that had mysteriously returned to their place. Sleep came fitfully that night, my dreams invaded by numbers recited in a child's voice and the sensation of something watching me from the darkness beyond the windows. I woke several times, once to the distinct sound of breathing next to my bed. When I snapped on my headlamp, the room was empty, but the chair at my desk had been moved to face my sleeping area. Morning couldn't come quickly enough, but when it did, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. Written in the condensation on the inside of the window, from the inside, where only I could have been, were 4 numbers: 87, 16, 42, 9. The same numbers from the radio broadcast. I wiped them away with a shaking hand, then splashed cold water on my face from the small sink. I needed to get a grip. I was alone in a remote location, and my mind was playing tricks on me. Isolation could do strange things to a person's perceptions. I decided to skip my research for the day and instead hike down to the forest floor for a change of scenery. The descent down the steep wooden staircase that spiraled around the central pole of the tower was usually invigorating, but that morning it felt interminable. 60 feet had never seemed so high. With each step, I had the irrational fear that the stairs would collapse beneath me, sending me plummeting to the rocky ground below. When I finally reached the bottom, I noticed something strange about the tower's support beams. Fresh scratches marred the weathered wood, deep gouges that couldn't have been made by any small forest creature. They looked almost deliberate. Patterns emerged as I studied them, crude symbols that seemed vaguely familiar though I couldn't place them. I spent the day hiking, pushing my body to exhaustion in hopes of achieving dreamless sleep. The forest was eerily quiet. No birdsong, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. By mid-afternoon, an unseasonable chill had settled over the landscape, and I found myself hurrying back to the tower, driven by an irrational fear of being caught outside after dark. The climb back up left me winded, but as I reached the observation deck, a wave of relief washed over me. The familiarity of my temporary home was comforting despite the strange occurrences. I decided the isolation was getting to me and resolved to maintain radio contact with the ranger station the next day, just to hear another human voice. That's when I realized my radio was back, sitting on my desk where I'd originally placed it. Next to it was my notebook, open to a page I didn't recognize. The handwriting was similar to mine but slightly distorted, as if someone had tried to imitate it. On the page was a crude map of the tower and surrounding area, with a location marked about half a mile east. Next to the mark were the 4 numbers: 87, 16, 42, 9. I slammed the notebook shut, my momentary relief evaporating. Someone had been in my living quarters. Someone had moved my things, written in my notebook, and was playing an elaborate trick on me. But who and how? The nearest human being was at least 30 miles away. Night fell quickly, and with it came a thick fog that obscured everything beyond the windows. I paced the small room, jumping at every creak and groan of the old wooden structure. The radio remained silent when I tried it, no matter which frequency I tuned to. Around midnight, I noticed the temperature in the room dropping rapidly. My breath clouded in front of me despite the wood stove burning at full capacity. The cold was unnatural, bone deep, as if the tower itself was being gradually encased in ice. Then the lights went out. My solar-powered lantern, which had been fully charged, died without warning. My headlamp followed suit seconds later. Even the small LED light on my watch went dark. I was plunged into absolute darkness, with only the faint orange glow from the wood stove providing any illumination. In that near darkness, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of the radio turning on by itself. Static filled the room, then cleared to reveal the same child's voice from before. "Come find me, Marcus. I'm waiting at the coordinates." The voice was clearer now, with an underlying tone that raised the hair on my arms. It wasn't a child's voice at all, I realized. It was something else entirely, something mimicking the innocent tones of a child but not quite getting it right. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice cracking. The radio static intensified, then cleared again. "You know who I am, Marcus. You've always known. 87, 16, 42, 9. Come find me." The radio went silent. I lunged for it, but in the darkness, I misjudged and sent it clattering to the floor. When I finally found it and tried to turn it on again, it remained dead. Something scraped against the window. I froze, hardly daring to breathe. The scraping continued, moving from one window to the next, circling the hexagonal room methodically. Then came a tapping on the glass. 1, 2, 3, 4. Pause. 1, 2, 3, 4. Against my better judgment, I moved toward the sound. As I approached the window, the fog outside seemed to press against the glass like a living thing, swirling and pulsing. Within its depths, I could almost make out a face, or something like a face, watching me. I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet in my haste to get away. As I fell, the temperature in the room plummeted further. The fire in the wood stove guttered and died, though I could see no draft or reason for it to extinguish. In the sudden darkness, I heard a new sound, the creak of floorboards as if under footsteps, moving slowly across the room toward me. But I was alone. I had to be alone. The footsteps stopped directly in front of where I lay frozen on the floor. I could feel a presence looming over me, though I could see nothing in the pitch darkness. Then, a whisper so close to my ear that I felt cold breath against my skin. "Tomorrow at dawn, Marcus. The coordinates. Come alone." I must have passed out from sheer terror because the next thing I knew, sunlight was streaming through the windows. I was lying on the floor where I had fallen, my body stiff and cold. The wood stove was cold, no trace of the fire I'd built the night before. But most disturbing of all was what I found on the desk. My compass and topographical map had been arranged neatly, with a route marked in red pen leading from the tower to a location that matched the coordinates from my notebook. Something was drawing me there. Something knew my name and was powerful enough to manipulate my environment, my possessions, perhaps even my mind. Logic dictated that I should leave immediately, hike out to my car, and drive back to civilization. But a compulsion had taken hold of me. I needed to know what was happening, what wanted me to find it. I packed a day bag with water, food, my knife, and a first aid kit. As an afterthought, I grabbed the radio, though it remained stubbornly dead. The descent down the tower stairs felt different this time, as if the very structure was watching me, aware of my intentions. The forest seemed to part before me as I followed the mapped route. No underbrush blocked my path, no fallen logs impeded my progress. It was as if the forest itself was ushering me toward my destination. The coordinates led to a small clearing I hadn't noticed in my previous explorations. At its center stood a single ancient pine tree, its bark blackened as if by fire, though no other trees nearby showed similar damage. As I approached, I noticed something embedded in the trunk. A small metal box, rusted with age but still intact, secured to the tree with what looked like crude iron nails. My hands trembled as I pried it free. The box was heavier than it looked, with no visible opening mechanism. I had to use my knife to force the corroded lid open. Inside was a Forest Service badge, ancient and tarnished, and a folded piece of paper, brittle with age. I carefully unfolded it to reveal a photograph. A black and white image of a man standing in front of the Blackwater Ridge Fire Lookout Tower. He was smiling at the camera, one hand raised in greeting. The resemblance was uncanny. He could have been my twin. On the back of the photograph, in faded ink, was written, Marcus Thorne, Blackwater Ridge, 1952. My name, my face, but not me. I was born in 1989. The photograph slipped from my numb fingers as a realization washed over me. The numbers, 87, 16, 42, 9. They weren't just random digits. They were coordinates, degrees, minutes, seconds, and they didn't match where I was standing. They pointed to somewhere else entirely. As if in response to my realization, the radio in my backpack crackled to life. The child's voice, clearer than ever, spoke directly to me. You're close, Marcus, but not there yet. Follow the frequency. The radio emitted a steady tone, rising and falling in pitch as I turned in place. I found myself following it like a dowsing rod, letting the strength of the signal guide me deeper into the forest, away from the marked trail. The tone led me to a depression in the ground, partially hidden by fallen leaves and forest debris. It looked like a sinkhole, roughly circular and about 6 feet in diameter. At the bottom, partially exposed, was what appeared to be a metal hatch. The radio signal intensified as I approached the edge of the hole. I knelt down, brushing away years of accumulated forest litter to reveal a rusted metal hatch with a wheel lock, like something from a submarine. Etched into the metal were 4 numbers, 87, 16, 42, 9. This was it. Whatever had been calling me, whatever had invaded my tower and my dreams, was below this hatch. Logic screamed at me to run, to forget what I'd found and never return. But the compulsion was too strong, the need to know too powerful. With tremendous effort, I turned the wheel lock. It gave way with a screech of protesting metal, and the hatch swung open to reveal a dark shaft with metal rungs embedded in the concrete wall, leading down into darkness. The radio whispered once more, "Come home, Marcus." I descended the ladder, the weak beam of my recovered headlamp barely penetrating the gloom. The air grew colder with each step down, carrying a stale, metallic smell that caught in my throat. After about 30 feet, my feet touched solid ground. I found myself in a narrow concrete corridor that stretched away into darkness. The walls were lined with faded photographs, hundreds of them. As I moved closer, my blood turned to ice. Every single photograph showed the same man, the man who looked like me, who shared my name, Marcus Thorne. In some, he was standing in front of the tower. In others, he was inside the very corridor where I now stood. The photos spanned decades, the subject never aging, always with the same smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. At the end of the corridor was a heavy metal door. Stenciled across it in fading paint were the words, Project Frequency, Authorized Personnel Only, and beneath that, Subject, Thorne, Marcus. My hands shook violently as I grasped the door handle. It turned easily, as if recently oiled. The door swung open to reveal a room full of antiquated radio equipment. Vacuum tubes, massive dials, reel-to-reel tape recorders. The technology was decades old but humming with power, lights blinking in rhythmic patterns. In the center of the room was a chair facing a microphone on a stand. Sitting in the chair was a figure with its back to me. As I watched, frozen in the doorway, it slowly turned to face me. It wore my face, but wrong, like a mask that didn't quite fit. Its eyes were black voids, its smile too wide, stretching impossibly across its face. When it spoke, its voice was the child's voice from the radio, emanating not from its mouth but from the equipment surrounding us. "Welcome home, Marcus. I've been waiting for you, for so long." I stumbled backward, my back hitting the wall of photographs. The thing wearing my face stood, moving with a jerky, unnatural gait. "Don't you recognize me? I'm you. Or rather, what's left of you after all these years of broadcasting. Project Frequency needed a voice, you see. A human connection to ensure transmission. I've been here since 1952, sending the signal. But I'm tired now, Marcus. So tired." Took a step toward me, its form flickering like bad reception. "You came back just in time. The cycle is complete. The numbers align. It's time for a new voice on the frequency." I ran. Back down the corridor, up the ladder, bursting out into the forest air with my lungs burning. I didn't stop running until I reached the tower, taking the stairs 2 at a time until I collapsed on the observation deck, gasping for breath. Night had fallen again, the forest around me silent and watchful. When I finally gathered enough courage to enter the living quarters, I found them exactly as I had left them that morning. No sign of disturbance, no mysterious writing, no moved objects. The radio sat silent on my desk. I approached it cautiously and turned it on. Nothing but static. Relief washed over me. Perhaps it had all been a hallucination, a waking nightmare brought on by isolation and stress. I decided I would pack up in the morning and leave, my research be damned. As I prepared for bed, I noticed my notebook open on the desk. I was certain I had closed it before leaving. On the open page was a new entry in my handwriting I had no memory of producing. The frequency requires a voice. The voice requires a body. The body requires replacement. Cycle complete. Below the text was a crude drawing of the tower with a figure standing at the top, a figure with no face. The lights went out. In the sudden darkness, I heard the familiar static of the radio turning on by itself. But this time, when the voice came through, it was my own voice speaking back to me. "Good night, Marcus. Sleep well. Tomorrow you begin your service on the frequency." I felt a presence behind me, breath on my neck, hands reaching for my shoulders. As I turned to face it, the static grew louder, drowning out my scream. The Blackwater Ridge Fire Lookout Tower stands empty now, according to official Forest Service records. The last occupant, Dr. Mark Chun, a forest ecology researcher, apparently departed abruptly 3 weeks into his planned 30-day stay, leaving behind most of his personal belongings and research materials. Rangers sent to investigate found the tower in perfect order, with no sign of disturbance or foul play. The only unusual item noted in their report was an old radio that continued to broadcast despite having no batteries or power source. A radio that emitted nothing but numbers in a calm, measured voice. 87, 16, 42, 9. The frequency continues to this day, for those who know where to tune in. Sometimes, late at night, the numbers stop and a voice, always different, always desperate, breaks through the static with the same message. "Help me. I'm still here. I'm still me. Please, find me." But no one ever does. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Not rot or mildew like you'd expect in an abandoned place, but something sharper, metallic and clinical, like sterilized instruments left too long in the sun. I paused in the doorway of the decommissioned ranger station, my hand still on the rusty key I turned in the lock. The scent vanished as quickly as it had come, replaced by the expected mustiness of a building that had stood empty for nearly 3 decades. "Hello," I called, though I knew no one would answer. The Forest Service had shuttered this remote observation post in the early 90s. My great-uncle Conrad had been the last ranger stationed here before budget cuts moved operations to the main headquarters 20 miles south. Now, after his death last month, the property had passed to me, his only living relative, along with a cryptic note. "The post needs a watcher. It's your turn now." The station sat perched on a cliff overlooking Mirror Lake, miles from the nearest town. The isolation had appealed to me immediately. After my recent divorce and subsequent panic attacks, I needed somewhere to regroup, to breathe. Somewhere without Sarah's concerned texts or my former colleagues' pitying glances. Here, there would be just me, the pines, and the lake reflecting a perfect sky. I'd barely set my duffel bag down when the radio crackled to life. Not just any radio, the ancient emergency weather radio bolted to the wall beside the kitchenette. Yellow with age, its plastic housing cracked, it had no business working at all. Yet it sputtered and hissed, white noise filling the one-room cabin. I approached it cautiously. The dial was set to OFF, and when I checked, the battery compartment was empty. I unplugged it from the wall socket, but the static continued unabated. "Great," I muttered, attributing it to some quirk of old wiring. I'd have to check the breaker box. Then, barely audible beneath the hiss, a voice whispered my name, "Daniel." I jerked back, heart leaping into my throat. The static swelled momentarily before cutting off completely, leaving the cabin wrapped in a silence so profound it felt like cotton in my ears. Radio interference, I told myself firmly. Nothing more. A logical explanation, the station's elevation and the metal roof could be picking up distant signals. Still, I couldn't help noticing that the radio remained silent for the rest of the evening as I unpacked. The next morning brought glistening sunlight and birdsong. I circled the perimeter of the property, assessing what needed repair. The station was essentially one large room with a small bathroom attachment, all built on a raised foundation. Wooden siding had weathered to a silvery gray, and the observation deck facing the lake needed several boards replaced. Inside, things were Spartan but functional. A kitchen area, a desk for paperwork, shelves lined with field guides and weather logs, and a Murphy bed that folded down from the wall. The only personal touch my great-uncle had left was a framed photograph on the desk. A much younger version of himself standing proudly in his Forest Service uniform beside another ranger, their arms around each other's shoulders, both smiling broadly. I picked it up for a closer look. The glass was immaculate, no dust, unlike everything else in the cabin. As I studied the second man's face, the frame suddenly grew ice-cold in my hands. Startled, I nearly dropped it, setting it back on the desk with a shudder. When I touched it again seconds later, it felt normal. Shaking off my unease, I focused on making the place habitable. After sweeping, dusting, and opening windows to air out the mustiness, I unpacked my laptop and attempted to get online. The satellite internet setup mentioned in my great-uncle's will proved non-functional. Another thing to fix. Strangely, I found myself almost relieved. The isolation felt right. That afternoon, I discovered the logbooks, dozens of them, filling a cabinet beside the desk. Most contained routine observations, weather patterns, wildlife sightings, visitor counts. My great-uncle's neat handwriting filled page after page with mundane details, until the entries from his final year. These grew increasingly strange. September 17th, 1992. Something moved across the lake today. Not on the surface, under it. Too large for local species. October 2nd, 1992. Radio interference continues. Voices unintelligible but persistent. Engineer found nothing wrong with equipment. Mentioned previous ranger had similar complaints. October 28th, 1992. Found another window open. Certain I closed and locked all before leaving yesterday. Third time this month. November 5th, 1992. The radio spoke Joseph's name today. Not possible. Electronics retired for now. The final entry, dated November 14th, 1992, consisted of a single sentence. It's in the walls now. A week later, according to newspaper clippings I found later, the station was decommissioned, and my great-uncle requested early retirement. I closed the logbook, unnerved yet intrigued. Conrad had never struck me as unstable or prone to imagination in our few meetings. If anything, he'd been pragmatic to a fault. The sound of running water interrupted my thoughts. I glanced up, listening. It was coming from the bathroom, a steady stream, as if the faucet had been turned on full blast. I hadn't used the sink since arriving. Rising slowly, I moved toward the bathroom door, which stood slightly ajar. Cold air seeped from the opening. I pushed it open. The sink was dry, the shower too. Not a drop of water anywhere. But the sound continued, now seeming to come from inside the walls themselves. Rushing water, growing louder, surrounding me on all sides. I pressed my hand against the bathroom tile, bone dry and ice cold. The noise reached a crescendo, then abruptly ceased, leaving only the pounding of my heart in my ears. That night I dreamed of drowning, of black water filling my lungs while something vast and cold brushed against my legs in the depths. I woke gasping, sheets soaked with sweat, to find all the faucets in the bathroom running full blast. By the third day, I'd convinced myself that stress and isolation were playing tricks on my mind. The faucets had turned on because of air in the pipes or irregular water pressure. The radio had picked up interference from somewhere. The cold spots were drafts from the poorly insulated walls. I needed this retreat to work. I had nowhere else to go, really, so I clung to rational explanations. That afternoon, I hiked down to the lakeshore, following a steep, overgrown trail. Mirror Lake lived up to its name. Its surface was glass smooth, reflecting the surrounding pines and cliffs in perfect detail. I sat on a rocky outcropping, breathing deeply, feeling some of my tension dissolve, until I saw the ripples. They began at the center of the lake, perfect concentric circles spreading outward, as if something had dropped into the water. But nothing had broken the surface. The ripples continued, growing larger, moving directly toward me. I scrambled to my feet as they reached the shore, lapping against the rocks with unnatural persistence. Something was disturbing the water from beneath. A dark shape moved beneath the surface, too large, too fast to be a fish. It circled once near the shore, then shot toward deeper water and vanished. My heart hammering, I backed up the trail, unable to tear my eyes from the lake. As I turned to climb back to the station, I noticed something that stopped me cold. Wet footprints on the dry stones, leading from the water's edge in my direction. Barefoot, adult-sized, and they hadn't been there moments before. I ran back to the station, locking the door behind me. That evening, the radio came alive again. This time, it wasn't just static and whispers, it was music. Scratchy, distant big band music from decades past, interrupted by bursts of speech too garbled to understand. I sat frozen at the desk, watching as the dial moved by itself, searching through frequencies. The music cut out, replaced by crystal-clear speech. "Joseph, come in. Do you copy? We've lost visual on your position." Silence. Then, "Conrad, do you copy? The water level is rising." "Conrad." The voice sounded desperate, professional but edged with fear. I found myself answering. "This is Daniel, Conrad's nephew." "Who is this?" Static surged, then quieted. "Daniel, find the entrance. He sealed it, but it's breaking through. You need to reinforce it." "What entrance? Who are you?" "Joseph Harlow, Forest Service. Conrad's partner." "I've been trying to warn." The radio died mid-sentence, plunging the cabin into silence. Joseph Harlow, the man from the photograph. With trembling hands, I picked up the frame again, studying the second ranger's face. Young, confident, with a slight cleft in his chin. I flipped the frame over and pried off the backing. Behind the photograph was a newspaper clipping, yellowed with age. "Forest Ranger missing. Presumed drowned. November 8, 1992. Search continues for Joseph Harlow, 34, who disappeared while investigating unusual water level fluctuations at Mirror Lake last Tuesday. Ranger Harlow's boat was found capsized, but dive teams have recovered no body. His partner, Senior Ranger Conrad Mercer, was the last to see Harlow alive. "The lake took him," Mercer told reporters, visibly distraught. As I read the final words, every light in the station flickered and died. In the sudden darkness, I heard it, a wet, slithering sound. Something was dragging itself across the deck outside. I fumbled for my phone, activating the flashlight. The beam caught a shadow passing across the window. Humanoid but wrong somehow, elongated and fluid. Water began seeping under the door, spreading across the floorboards in impossible tendrils that moved against gravity, climbing the walls. The slithering stopped directly outside the door. 3 heavy knocks followed, each one rattling the frame. Then a voice, waterlogged and bubbling, yet unmistakably human. "Let me in, Daniel." I need to come back inside. A fourth knock, powerful enough to splinter the wood around the lock. I backed away, searching frantically for a weapon, anything to defend myself. The water on the floor had formed a perfect circle around me, rising at the edges like a living barrier. Let me in. The voice was inside now, somehow emanating from the radio again. Conrad sealed me away, but I always find a way back. I belong here. We all do eventually. The temperature plummeted. My breath clouded before me as frost crept across the windows. The door shuddered under another impact. In desperation, I upended the desk, sending papers and books flying. The floorboards beneath, different from the others. Newer, nailed down with excessive fasteners. Understanding dawned. The entrance. Conrad had sealed it. Working frantically, I pried at the boards with a letter opener from the desk. The wood gave way more easily than it should have, revealing darkness beneath. Not a crawl space or foundation as expected, but an impossible void. Cold air rushed upward, carrying the smell of lake water and something else. Something ancient and decaying. The door splintered behind me. I turned to see a figure silhouetted in the doorway. A man's shape formed entirely of black water, features rippling and reforming constantly. Only the eyes remained fixed, pale blue and terribly human, filled with need. He thought he could keep me out, the thing said, water dripping from its mouth as it formed the words. Thought he could seal the breach, but the lake remembers. The lake wants back what was taken. It lurched forward, water limbs leaving glistening trails across the floor. I stumbled back, felt the edge of the exposed hole behind me. The temperature dropped further. Ice crystals formed in the air between us. The creature, Joseph, or what remained of him, hesitated. Conrad could only hold me back for so long, it said. Now it's your turn to try. I glanced down into the hole. Far below, impossibly distant given the station's construction, water gleamed in darkness. A subterranean extension of the lake, reaching up through bedrock, defying all natural law. The water thing lunged. I dodged, reaching for the only weapon available, the framed photograph, still on the floor where I dropped it. I hurled it at the creature. Glass shattered against its liquid form. But instead of passing through harmlessly, the photograph seemed to sink into the water thing's chest. It recoiled, keening horribly, its form destabilizing. In that moment of confusion, I attacked, shoving the creature with all my strength toward the hole. It grappled with me, cold hands burning like dry ice against my skin. We struggled at the edge and then we were falling. I caught the edge of the floorboards at the last second. The water thing wasn't as fortunate. It plunged into the darkness, its scream Dopplering away, cut short by a distant splash. Gasping, I pulled myself up and frantically began hammering the floorboards back into place with the heel of my boot. When the last board was roughly secured, I collapsed, shivering violently. Dawn found me huddled in a corner, watching the sealed floor for any sign of seepage. Over the next few days, I repaired the door, fixed the floorboards properly, and tried to convince myself it had been a stress-induced hallucination. The radio remained silent. The water ran normally. I almost believed I was safe, until I developed the photographs on my phone. I'd taken several shots of the lake my first day here. In every image, standing at the water's edge, was a figure made of darkness, watching me, waiting. More disturbing still, I found Conrad's will, hidden in a sealed envelope between the pages of his final logbook. In it, a single paragraph stood out. The station must remain occupied. A mercer must always be the watcher. I have held it back for 30 years, but now I pass the duty to you, Daniel. Do not leave. Do not let anyone else take your place. The thing in the lake is patient. It wears Joseph's face, but it is not him. It will try to replace you, as it tried to replace me. As long as someone stands guard over the seal, the breach remains closed. I'm sorry. Last night, the radio spoke again. A different voice this time, my great-uncle's. Daniel, he whispered through the static. You have to understand. Joseph was my best friend. I had to push him in. It wanted a host. Better him than me. Better him than the world outside. But now it's learned to wear his shape. It's learning yours too. I looked down at my reflection in the window glass. For a moment, just a heartbeat. My features seemed to ripple like disturbed water. Outside, the lake gleams black under moonlight. From my vantage point, I can see the perfect circle of still water amid rippling waves, directly above where the breach must be. Sometimes, I think I see faces beneath the surface, looking up. Joseph, Conrad, perhaps others before them. The radio hasn't spoken again, but the water pressure drops at exactly 3:17 every morning. The taps run dry for precisely 6 minutes, then return with a rush of sulfur-scented water. I've nailed the floorboards down with every fastener I could find, but some mornings I wake to find one nail raised slightly, as if pushed from below. I understand now why Conrad left me the station. Not as a gift, but as an inheritance of duty. Prison sentence. I should leave. Any sane person would. But yesterday, looking through the station's dusty storage closet, I found a box of old photographs. Rangers from decades past, all posed in the same spot, on the observation deck, lake in the background. Every image showed 2 rangers arm in arm, and in every photo, one ranger's face was blurred, as if it couldn't quite hold its human shape when captured on film. The station has always had 2 occupants, one to watch, one to be watched. I've started hearing wet footsteps on the deck at night. Sometimes, when I look out the window, I see myself standing by the lake's edge, staring back. The radio whispers constantly now, in a voice that sounds increasingly like my own. Let me in, Daniel. It's your turn to go into the lake. I think I've always been meant to be here. The water called me long before Conrad died. I just didn't recognize its voice until now. Tonight, I'll nail more boards over the floor. I'll reinforce the door. I'll ignore the radio's whispers. But sometimes I wonder if I'm truly keeping something out, or if I'm being kept in. The lake is so beautiful at sunset. Sometimes I stand at the edge, watching my reflection ripple and distort. Sometimes my reflection moves when I don't. Sometimes it smiles. I think I'll go down to the shore again tomorrow, just to check the water level, just to look at my reflection one more time. After all, someone needs to be the watcher, and someone needs to be watched. Whispers in the water. The first thing I noticed wasn't a sound, but its absence. I was sitting at the edge of the dock, legs dangling over black water, when the night went silent. The symphony of spring peepers that had been deafening moments before simply ceased, as if someone had flipped a switch. Even the gentle lapping of lake water against weathered posts seemed to hesitate, suspended between ripples. That's when the water called my name. Daniel! My name emerged from beneath the surface, not bubbling up, not echoing across the water, but somehow originating from the lake itself, as if the entire body of water had exhaled my name in a single, collective whisper. I scrambled back from the edge, heart pounding against my ribs. The flashlight beam I swept across the lake's surface revealed nothing but obsidian stillness, reflecting fragments of a sky speckled with stars. I told myself it was exhaustion playing tricks, that 30 hours of driving with minimal sleep could make anyone hallucinate. Ranger Outpost 17 wasn't my first choice for a 3-month writing retreat. But after my publisher's 3rd deadline extension and the spectacular implosion of my relationship with Elise, I needed somewhere no one would find me. Somewhere without cell service, without internet, without distraction. Somewhere I could finish the manuscript that was now 2 years overdue. My uncle's connections with the National Park Service had secured me this decommissioned ranger station on the northern shore of Lake Blackwood. The nearest town was 40 miles of unpaved forest road away, and the closest neighbor was an elderly wilderness guide who lived 8 miles south around the lake's curve. Perfect isolation. The cabin itself had once been handsome, a sturdy one-room structure with a stone fireplace and windows on 3 sides, built in the 1940s for fire watchers. Now it sagged with age, its pine logs silver gray and cracked, its metal roof streaked with rust. Inside was sparse. A narrow bed, a kitchenette with a propane stove, a desk facing the lake, a wood stove, and a bathroom edition from the 70s with temperamental plumbing. I chalked the whisper up to travel fatigue and spent the rest of that first evening unpacking. The only unusual thing I noticed was that the cabin was colder than it should have been for late May. Cold enough that I could see my breath in certain corners, even after I got the wood stove crackling. I fell asleep that night to the sound of returned frog songs, distant owls, and something else I couldn't quite identify. A rhythmic tapping from somewhere I couldn't pinpoint.
Top, top, top. Top, top, top.
Regular as a metronome. Probably a branch against the roof, I reasoned, though there wasn't much wind. The next morning, I woke to find all of my belongings had been rearranged. Not dramatically, nothing was broken or thrown about, but with a meticulous precision that was somehow more disturbing. My shoes, which I'd left haphazardly by the door, were now perfectly aligned, toes pointing toward my bed. The stack of research books I'd piled on the desk now formed a perfect pyramid. My toiletries in the bathroom had been organized by height, but most unsettling was my laptop. I distinctly remembered closing it before going to bed, yet now it sat open, the screen glowing with a blank document. The cursor blinked steadily in the upper left corner, as if waiting. I slammed it shut and made coffee with shaking hands, telling myself there must be a rational explanation. Maybe I'd sleepwalked. It wouldn't be the first time stress had triggered parasomnia. I'd once woken to find I'd reorganized my entire bookshelf alphabetically while completely unconscious. But as the day progressed, more unexplainable things occurred. My coffee mug slid across the table when I wasn't looking. The temperature in the bathroom plummeted so dramatically that the mirror frosted over. And twice, I heard my name whispered just behind my right ear when I was alone. By evening, I was sleeping with the lights on, trying to convince myself that isolation was simply making me paranoid. I called it early, climbing into bed with one of my research books, a history of the region I'd brought along for background material. That's when I discovered the photographs. Between pages 146 and 147, where I'd left off reading the night before, were 3 Polaroid pictures I had never seen. They showed the lake at what appeared to be different time periods, one from the 1970s judging by the film quality, one much older, perhaps from the 40s, and one that looked recent. In each photo, a dark shape was visible just beneath the water's surface near the dock. In the first picture, it could have been a shadow or a fallen log. In the second, it more distinctly resembled a human silhouette. In the third, most recent photo, the shape was clearly a face. Eyes open, mouth stretched in what could have been a scream or a smile, pressing up against the underside of the water as if against glass. I dropped the book as if burned. Those pictures hadn't been there when I'd read the chapter yesterday. I was certain of it. Sleep was impossible after that. I sat at the desk with every light blazing until dawn broke over the pines. The book sealed shut and shoved to the farthest corner of the room. The next day passed without incident, so completely normal that I began to think I'd imagined everything. I wrote 3,000 words, more than I had in months. The pressure in my chest eased. Even the persistent chill seemed to abate. That night, I decided to try to record any unusual occurrences. I set up my phone to take time-lapse video of the main room while I slept, primed my digital recorder, and even scattered flour on the floor near the door and windows, an old ghost hunter's trick I'd researched for my novel. I slept soundly for the first time since arriving, and woke refreshed. Eagerly, I checked my makeshift detection systems and found nothing. The flour was undisturbed. The video showed only the empty room, occasionally illuminated by moonlight when clouds shifted. The audio recording contained nothing but the cabin's usual creaks and my own snoring. I felt ridiculous. Maybe the stress of my deadline combined with the isolation was affecting me more than I realized. I resolved to take a day off, to hike around the lake and clear my head. The late spring day was perfect for it. Warm sunshine filtering through new leaves, wildflowers dotting the understory. I followed a narrow trail that hugged the lakeshore, noticing how clear the water was. So clear that, in places, I could see 30 feet down to where fallen trees created underwater architecture for schools of small fish. Around midday, I came to a rocky outcropping that jutted into the lake. Standing there, gazing across the water at distant mountains, I felt a sudden shift, as if the world had tilted slightly on its axis. The breeze died. The ambient forest sounds faded. The sunlight seemed to dim, though there wasn't a cloud in the sky. From across the lake came a sound I can only describe as wet footsteps, the unmistakable squelch of waterlogged shoes on hard ground. Squish step, but there was no one visible on the opposite shore. The footsteps grew louder, seeming to cross the lake directly toward me. I watched, paralyzed, as a line of ripples disturbed the mirror-smooth surface, something invisible walking across water. Then the ripples stopped, about 15 feet from shore, right in front of me. "I've been waiting for you, Daniel," came a voice that sounded like water trickling through a rusted pipe. It seemed to originate from the empty air above those final ripples. I ran, blind with panic. I crashed through underbrush, abandoning the trail, caring only about putting distance between myself and whatever had spoken. I didn't stop until I stumbled back into the cabin's clearing, sides heaving, face scratched from whipping branches. Safe inside with the door bolted, I tried to rationalize what had happened. A hunter playing tricks, perhaps, or another visitor I hadn't been told about. But even as I formed these explanations, I knew they were lies. That night, everything changed. It began with the tapping again. Tap, 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 but this time it clearly came from beneath the floorboards. I pressed my ear to the wooden planks and heard what sounded like water sloshing in an enclosed space. When I straightened up, I noticed wet footprints materializing across the floor. Small, bare feet, water darkening the wood in deliberate steps that led from the door to my bed. They stopped just short of where I stood. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice cracking. The lights flickered once, twice, then died completely. In the sudden darkness, I felt a cold dampness seep into the room, bringing with it the smell of stagnant water and decomposing vegetation. Something brushed against my hand. Wet fingers, ice cold and papery soft, attempting to intertwine with mine. I recoiled, fumbling for my flashlight on the nearby table. When I finally clicked it on, the beam revealed walls that streamed with water, as if the entire cabin had been submerged and then lifted back to the surface. In the center of the room stood a small puddle, perfectly round and impossibly deep, the water within it black and still as oil. As I watched in horror, the puddle began to expand, spreading across the floor like a living thing. I backed away until I hit the wall, the flashlight beam trembling across the impossible pool that now covered most of the floor. From its center rose a figure. First just a crown of dark hair, then a forehead, then eyes that reflected my flashlight like a nocturnal animal's. The face emerged to reveal a young woman's features, preserved as if in formaldehyde. Her skin the bloodless blue-white of something that had never seen sunlight. She rose until her shoulders cleared the water, her soaking dress clinging to her collarbones. Then she smiled, revealing teeth that had been filed to points. The flashlight died. In the absolute darkness, I felt her cold, wet hands close around my ankles. I don't remember much of what happened next. I have flashes of being dragged across the floor, of icy water closing over my face, of sinking into impossible depths beneath what should have been solid ground, of a voice whispering secrets in my ear, telling me why she had chosen this place, why she had waited, why it had to be me. I woke at dawn, lying face down on the dock, my clothes soaking wet and reeking of lake bottom. Coughing up silty water, I crawled back to the cabin, certain I had nearly drowned, though whether by accident or by some supernatural force, I couldn't be sure. The cabin looked normal in the morning light.
No puzzles. No wet footprints.
No sign of the night's terror except my drenched clothing and the lingering taste of mud in my mouth. I should have left then. Any rational person would have. But two things kept me there. First was my manuscript. When I checked my laptop, I found that an additional 50 pages had been written. Not in my style, but telling a story about a young woman who had drowned in Lake Blackwood in 1943. The prose was archaic, the details horrifically specific. It described how she had been weighted down with rocks by a jealous lover, how she had struggled as water filled her lungs, how her spirit had remained trapped in the lake for decades, occasionally reaching out to visitors who might help her find justice. The second reason I stayed was that I found her diary. It was tucked between the mattress and box spring when I went to change the sheets. A small leather-bound journal with pages warped by water damage. Most entries were mundane. The daily life of a young woman named Rebecca who had come to work as a cook for the fire watchers in 1943. But the final entries detailed her growing fear of one ranger in particular, how he watched her, how he had threatened her when she rejected his advances. The last entry was dated May 26, 1943. He's outside my door again tonight. Said if I won't be his, I'll never be anyone's. I'm scared of what he might do. If anything happens to me, it was Hank. God help me, I hear him trying the lock. There was no further entry. The rest of the pages were blank, except the final one, which contained a single line in different handwriting. She's still in the lake. I put her there. And now, you know, the handwriting was identical to the new pages in my manuscript. I spent the next 3 days in a fever of investigation. I couldn't leave, not now that I knew. I went through every inch of the cabin, finding more evidence tucked into the structure itself. Behind a loose stone in the fireplace was a rusted ring with a small blue stone. Under a floorboard near the door, I discovered a locket containing a faded photograph of a young woman. Rebecca, I presumed, her solemn eyes staring across decades. Each night, the manifestations grew stronger. Objects flew across the room. The temperature would plunge until frost formed on the inside of windows. The tapping beneath the floorboards became a pounding, then a splintering, as if something was trying to break through from below. And each morning, I would find more pages added to my manuscript. Details of how Rebecca had been murdered, where her body had been hidden, how her killer had lived in this very cabin for 30 more years, dying of old age without ever confessing his crime. On the 6th night, I decided to confront whatever was in the lake. Armed with the diary, the ring, and the locket, I walked out onto the dock under a moonless sky. The water lay preternaturally still, a vast plate of obsidian. "Rebecca," I called, my voice thin in the darkness. "I know what happened to you. I can help you." Nothing happened for a long moment. Then, slowly, the water at the end of the dock began to stir. Not in ripples, but in a deliberate swirl, as if something large was rising from the depths. A hand broke the surface, bluish-white, slender-fingered. Then another. They grasped the edge of the dock, and Rebecca pulled herself halfway out of the water. In the dim starlight, I could see her more clearly than before. The dark hair plastered to her skull, the hollow cheeks, the eyes that were too large and too knowing for a human face. "You have to find me," she said, her voice gurgling through what could have been water or blood. "He put me in the walls." "The walls?" I whispered, confused. "You're in the lake." She shook her head slowly, water streaming from her hair. "Not all of me. The rest is in the walls, behind the stones. He built me into the chimney, brick by brick." Horror washed through me as I understood. I ran back to the cabin, to the fireplace that had never felt quite warm enough. With a fireplace poker, I began to pry at the stones, working loose mortar that crumbled more easily than it should have after 80 years. The third stone I removed revealed darkness beyond. Not the solid backing I expected, but a cavity. And within that cavity was the unmistakable curve of a human skull. I stumbled back, dropping the poker with a clatter. Behind me, the door slammed shut. Every window in the cabin rattled in its frame. The temperature plunged until my breath clouded before me. A voice that was not Rebecca's, deeper, masculine, filled with rage, roared from the shadows. She was mine. The furniture began to shake. Books flew from shelves. The wood stove door banged open and closed, sending sparks across the room. I was caught between two spirits now, Rebecca's watery presence seeping under the door, forming a puddle that spread toward the fireplace, and something older, angrier, that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. I made a decision then. I would help her find rest, whatever it took. Through the chaos, I fought my way back to the fireplace and continued tearing at the stones. Behind me, I could hear heavy footsteps pacing, could feel the weight of furious eyes on my back. Twice, invisible hands tried to drag me away from my task, leaving bruises on my arms that would linger for weeks. but I persisted, stone after stone, until the cavity gaped wide enough to reveal the gruesome truth. A full skeleton, curled into an impossible position, brick and mortar sealing it into what had become its tomb. As the last stones fell away, the puddle on the floor surged forward, flowing up the wall and into the cavity, enveloping the bones in a cocoon of lake water. A piercing scream, neither fully human nor fully spirit, shook the cabin to its foundation. The windows shattered, the floorboards buckled, and then silence, complete, absolute silence, broken only by my ragged breathing and the soft patter of water dripping from the eviscerated fireplace. It was over, or so I thought. They found me 3 weeks later, when my uncle sent a park ranger to check on me after I missed our scheduled call. I was sitting on the dock, staring into the water, my laptop clutched to my chest. I hadn't eaten in days, hadn't slept, had spoken to no one but the face I now saw clearly beneath the lake's surface. Not Rebecca anymore, but someone with my features, my eyes, my expression of perpetual terror. The manuscript was complete, all 400 pages of it. Not my novel, but Rebecca's story told in harrowing detail. The final chapter described how justice had finally been served, how her bones had been found, how her spirit had been freed to move on. But it also described the price of that freedom. A replacement was needed, someone to take her place in the lake, to become the new guardian of her secrets. The doctors say I'm suffering from extreme dehydration and psychological trauma. They don't believe me when I tell them I can't leave the area, that I'm bound to Lake Blackwood now. They don't understand why I scream when they try to give me water, why my skin feels perpetually damp no matter how many times I dry it. They'll release me soon. They have to, and I'll return to the lake, to the dock, to my vigil. Because while Rebecca has moved on, something else remains. Something that now wears my face beneath the water. Something that whispers my name at night in a voice like my own, but not quite. Sometimes, in my dreams, I'm still sinking through black water, lungs burning, rocks weighing down my pockets. Other times, I'm standing on the shore, watching as another visitor arrives at Outpost 17, drawn by the same need for solitude that brought me here. And I wait, patient as still water, for them to hear their name whispered from the depths. Because the lake is always hungry, and I am no longer alone. The light on my desk flickered 3 times before dying completely. I wouldn't have thought anything of it if not for the pattern. 3 distinct pulses like a signal. My cabin, perched on the lonely outcrop of Widow's Point, had its fair share of electrical problems. A lighthouse keeper's quarters built in 1887 wasn't exactly up to modern code, even with the renovations from the 1970s. I reached for my phone to use as a flashlight, but my fingers froze mid-air as I watched the desk lamp flicker again. 3 pulses. Pause. 3 pulses. Just a brownout, I muttered to the empty room, but my voice sounded thin, unconvincing even to my own ears. I had been the temporary caretaker at Widow's Point Lighthouse for exactly 16 days. The Maritime Historical Society had hired me to maintain the property during the off-season, October through April, while they secured funding for proper restoration. For a struggling writer seeking solitude and inspiration, 6 months in an isolated lighthouse on Lake Superior's most desolate stretch seemed perfect. The nearest town, Hollow Harbor, was an hour's drive along a winding road that frequently became impassable during winter storms. My only company was the infrequent supply delivery and the haunting moan of the automated foghorn that had replaced the lighthouse's original function decades ago. I got up and checked the circuit breaker, restoring power to my quarters. Outside, the wind howled against the century-old windows, and Lake Superior crashed against the jagged rocks below. The weather report had promised a major storm system tonight, the first real gale of the season. As I made my evening tea, I noticed my reflection in the small kitchen window. Behind me, the door to the pantry slowly swung open. I spun around, heart racing, but found only darkness beyond the threshold. The door hung open at precisely the same angle I'd seen countless times when the crosswind from the hallway caught it. Nothing unusual, except I hadn't opened any windows or doors to create such a draft. "Hello," I called, feeling foolish immediately. Something rustled in the pantry, a soft, papery sound like fingers trailing across the shelves. I approached carefully, flashlight held high, illuminating the narrow storage space. Empty. Just canned goods, dry pasta, and the other staples I'd stocked for the coming winter. As I reached to close the door, my name floated through the air. A hoarse whisper so close it seemed to brush against my ear. Daniel. I jerked backward, slamming into the refrigerator. The whisper had been clear, unmistakable, and impossible. I lived alone. The nearest human was miles away. Who's there? I demanded, my voice cracking. Only the wind answered, moaning through the eaves. I slept poorly that night, waking repeatedly to what sounded like footsteps on the circular staircase that led up to the beacon room. Each time I convinced myself it was just the old building settling, the wooden stairs expanding and contracting with temperature changes as the storm intensified outside. Morning brought calm weather and rational thoughts. I laughed at my midnight fears while making coffee, though I couldn't help noticing that my laptop, which I'd left closed on the desk, was now open, the screen displaying the document I'd been working on. I approached it cautiously. The cursor blinked at the end of the paragraph I'd written yesterday, but something new had been added. He watches from the beacon room. Always watching. My hands trembled as I deleted the text. A prank? Had someone from the Historical Society come by while I slept? But the guest log by the entrance remained empty, and the security system showed no activity overnight. I spent the morning exploring the lighthouse grounds, trying to shake the uneasiness that clung to me like the persistent mist rolling in from the lake. The lighthouse stood tall and imposing, a white stone tower rising 90 feet from the rocky ground, with my living quarters built into its base. A small, neglected garden surrounded the structure, bounded by a low stone wall beyond which the land dropped steeply to the churning waters below. Behind the main structure stood a small equipment shed I hadn't yet explored. The padlock hung broken, the hasp rusted through. Inside, I found maintenance tools, weather-beaten life preservers, and a wooden chest tucked away in the corner. The chest wasn't locked. Inside lay a collection of lighthouse keeper logs dating back to the 1940s, each book filled with meticulous handwriting documenting weather conditions, maintenance tasks, and occasionally, personal observations. I carried several volumes back to my quarters, eager for company, even if only the written words of those who had come before me. As I closed the shed door, the distinct feeling of being watched settled over me. I turned, scanning the empty grounds, my eyes finally traveling up to the beacon room where the glass caught the midday sun. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, I could swear I saw a silhouette, a dark figure standing in the lantern room, looking down at me. I blinked, and it was gone. That afternoon, I pored over the logs, most of which contained mundane entries about lamp oil supplies and fog conditions. But the log from 1952 caught my attention. The keeper, a man named Harold Crane, had begun making strange notations in the margins. October 17, 1952, weather clear, visibility excellent. Lamp serviced at dusk. He's moving things again when I'm not looking. October 19, 1952, heavy rain throughout day, wind from northeast, 22 knots. Foghorn operational for 7 hours. Footsteps on the stairs at night. No one there when I check. October 25, 1952, first snow of season, light accumulation. Found all the kitchen drawers open this morning. Someone is in here with me. The entries grew increasingly disturbed until November 12th, when they stopped abruptly. The next entry, dated November 30th, was written in different handwriting, noting that a replacement keeper had been dispatched after Harold Crane was found in a state of acute mental distress, requiring hospitalization. I closed the book, a chill working its way down my spine despite the warmth of the fireplace. Outside, the daylight was already fading, the short autumn day surrendering to darkness. That's when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of the beacon room door opening and closing 90 feet above me. The heavy iron latch had a distinctive clank that echoed down the spiral staircase.
I sat frozen, listening.
Slow, Deliberate footsteps began descending the stairs. But that was impossible. The only access to the beacon room was through my living quarters. No one could have gotten up there without passing me. The footsteps continued, unhurried, methodical, growing louder as they spiraled down toward me. With each step, the temperature in my room seemed to drop a degree. I lunged for my phone and called the emergency contact number for the Historical Society. After 4 rings, Beth Anderson answered. "Daniel, is everything okay at the point?" she asked. "I think someone's in the lighthouse," I whispered, moving away from the staircase door. "I can hear someone coming down from the beacon room." Pause. "Daniel, that's not possible. The beacon room has been sealed off since September for renovation. The door is bolted shut and padlocked from your side. No one can get in there." My eyes darted to the heavy wooden door that led to the staircase. A large iron padlock secured the bolt, just as she said. But the footsteps continued on the other side, now halfway down. "I can hear them," I insisted, my voice cracking. "Someone's coming down the stairs right now." "Daniel, listen to me. You're alone out there. The isolation can play tricks." The call dropped. No service. Not unusual during storms. But the skies had been clear all day. The footsteps stopped directly on the other side of the padlocked door. I could see the solid bolt and padlock still securely in place. Nothing could open that door from the other side. The iron handle turned slowly, the mechanism grinding with disuse. The padlock held. Something heavy threw itself against the door, making the entire frame shudder. Again, wood splintered around the hinges. I backed away, looking frantically for a weapon, a way out. The pounding stopped as suddenly as it had begun. Silence flooded the room, broken only by my ragged breathing. Then came the whisper again, not from behind the door but directly behind me. "Daniel, you took my place." I whirled around to empty air, my heart threatening to burst from my chest. That night, I barricaded myself in the bedroom, pushing a heavy dresser against the door. I left all the lights on and sat on the bed, back against the wall, a kitchen knife in my trembling hand. The wind had picked up again, whistling around the lighthouse in rising shrieks. Around midnight, the power went out. The sudden darkness was absolute except for the glow of my phone. In that dim blue light, I watched in horror as the dresser began to slide slowly away from the door, inch by excruciating inch, as if pushed by invisible hands. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The dresser continued its impossible journey across the floor until it came to rest against the opposite wall. The bedroom door swung open to the darkness beyond. No one entered. Nothing happened. Just the open door and the invitation of the darkness. After what felt like hours, exhaustion overcame terror, and I fell into a fitful sleep, still clutching the knife. I dreamed of climbing the spiral staircase, up and up toward the beacon room. In the dream, someone waited for me there, a figure silhouetted against the great lens of the lighthouse lamp. I woke to bright sunlight and birds calling outside my window. The dresser stood against the far wall where it had been moved, the door still open. It hadn't been a dream. On my phone was a text message from Beth, checking in. Everything okay after the storm? I didn't know how to respond. What could I say? That an impossible entity was terrorizing me? That I was losing my mind like Harold Crane had 70 years before? Instead, I went to the kitchen to make coffee, desperately needing the normalcy of my morning routine. As the coffee brewed, filling the air with its comforting aroma, I noticed small wet footprints on the floor, too small to be mine, leading from the front door to the staircase door and stopping there. The water in the prints had a reddish tinge. I followed them to the padlocked door. The lock remained secure, but something dark had seeped through the crack beneath the door. A small puddle of water, rust-colored and smelling of salt and decay. My curiosity overcame my fear. I had to know what was happening. With shaking hands, I unlocked the padlock and slid back the bolt. The door swung open easily, revealing the narrow stone staircase spiraling upward into shadow. Against all better judgment, I began to climb. The air grew colder with each step, my breath clouding in front of me. The stone walls wept with moisture, dark stains spreading across the ancient mortar. Every few steps I stopped to listen, but heard only my own labored breathing and the distant cry of gulls outside. 90 feet up, I reached the beacon room door, a heavy iron affair with a circular porthole window. It was bolted shut from my side, just as Beth had said, confirming that no physical being could have passed through. I hesitated, my hand on the bolt, knowing I stood at a threshold in more ways than one. Whatever lay on the other side would change everything I thought I knew about reality. I slid back the bolt and pushed open the door. The beacon room was a circular chamber dominated by the enormous Fresnel lens in its center, a masterpiece of prismatic glass designed to magnify the lighthouse lamp's beam to reach miles out to sea. Dust covers draped the idle equipment, and renovation tools lay scattered where workers had left them weeks ago. I circled the room, finding nothing unusual until I reached the western window overlooking the lake. There, scratched into decades of paint on the windowsill, were names, dozens of them, each with a date. The earliest went back to the 1920s, the most recent just months ago. With growing dread, I recognized them as the names of lighthouse keepers. Harold Crane's name was there, with others I'd seen in the logs. Temporary caretakers, renovation workers, and at the end of the list, freshly carved, Daniel Winters, the name that had been whispered in my ear. My name. Something compelled me to look up from the sill to the window itself. Through the glass, I could see not the expected view of Lake Superior stretching to the horizon, but a close-up reflection of my own face, except it wasn't moving as I moved. The reflection smiled as I gasped in horror. "You took my place," it said, its mouth forming the words that emerged as whispers in the air around me. "But I'm coming back." I stumbled backward, knocking into the lens assembly. The reflection in the window didn't move with me. It stayed fixed, watching, its smile widening to reveal teeth too sharp, too numerous. "Who are you?" I managed to ask. "The keeper," the whisper came. "The one who watches, the one who waits." My back hit the wall beside the door as the air in the room began to stir, circling the lens like a slow cyclone. Dust covers rose and danced in the unnatural wind. "I don't understand," I pleaded. The whisper came from directly beside my ear now, though the apparition remained by the window. "Every lighthouse needs a keeper, Daniel. Every light needs a guardian." When the real light went dark, I remained, waiting for the perfect replacement. The whirlwind intensified, tools clattering across the floor, dust and debris spinning around the lens that had inexplicably begun to glow with a dim, pulsing light. 3 flashes, pause, 3 flashes. Understanding dawned with horrifying clarity. The Historical Society hadn't been entirely truthful about the lighthouse's decommissioning. Something had happened here, something they'd covered up, something connected to the abrupt ends of so many caretakers' tenures. I lunged for the door, but it slammed shut before I could reach it. The bolt shot home with a definitive clank. "You can't leave." The whisper became a chorus of voices, men and women, spanning decades. "None of us can leave." The glow from the lens intensified, painfully bright now, washing the room in unnatural light. Within its beams, I began to see them. Translucent figures circling the lens, their faces contorted in silent screams. Former keepers, caretakers, workers, all trapped, all absorbed into whatever entity claimed the lighthouse as its domain. Among them, I recognized the face from my reflection. Not me, but so similar we could have been brothers. He approached as the others continued their eternal orbit around the light. "Every 20 years it needs new blood," he said, his voice clearer now as he solidified before me. "I was chosen in 2002. Your turn now, Daniel." I scrambled away, pressing my back against the door. "This isn't real," I insisted. "This can't be happening." He smiled, the same unnatural smile from the window. "We all said that. I was Graham. Before me was Eliza. Before her, Vincent. We keep the light. We become the keeper. And eventually, we find our replacement." Outside the windows, I realized with dawning horror that the sky had gone black. Not night dark, but an absolute absence of light or stars. The only illumination came from the beacon itself, pulsing its impossibly bright signal into that perfect void. "What is this place?" I whispered. "The Point," Graham answered simply. "The real Widow's Point, not the tourist attraction down the coast that borrowed our name. This is the original, the one they tried to erase from maps after what happened in 1887. The lens flared blindingly bright. When my vision cleared, the room had changed. Gone were the renovation tools and dust covers. The beacon room now appeared as it would have in the 19th century. Polished brass, gleaming lens, oil lamps burning impossibly bright. And now I could see them clearly. Dozens of translucent figures crowding the small space, all in period clothing from different decades, all with the same hollow-eyed look of captivity. The keeper drowned his family before taking his own life. Graham continued conversationally, as if discussing the weather. 5 children and a wife dragged to the rocks below. But death didn't release them or him. The lighthouse claimed them all. It's been claiming ever since. "No," I said, fumbling for the door handle behind me. "I'm leaving. Now." Graham's expression hardened. "No one leaves. The door you came through no longer leads back to your quarters, Daniel. It hasn't for days." My blood ran cold. "Days? I just came up the stairs. Time moves differently here. You've been climbing those stairs for 3 days. Your body down there," he gestured downward, "has been sitting motionless, staring at nothing. They'll find you catatonic, just like they found me. Just like they found Harold Crane and all the others." I yanked open the door, expecting to see the spiral staircase. Instead, the doorway opened onto a sheer drop into howling blackness.
No stairs.
No bottom, just endless falling darkness. I slammed it shut, my entire body shaking. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the increasingly loud hum emanating from the lens. "Want?" Graham laughed, the sound echoing unnaturally. "We don't want anything. We're just following the rules. One becomes many, many become one. The lighthouse must be kept." The other spirits had begun to move closer, forming a tightening circle around me. Their mouths moved in unison. "The lighthouse must be kept." The lens pulsed faster now, 3 flashes so quick they almost blurred together. The light it cast was no longer white, but a deep, unnatural crimson that painted the room the color of fresh blood. "Your time in the world is over, Daniel," Graham said with something like sympathy. "Join us. Become the keeper." They surged forward as one, Graham in the lead. I felt the first icy touch on my arm, a sensation of such profound wrongness that I screamed, the sound torn from my throat and swallowed by the humming lens. As they converged upon me, dissolving into a fog that engulfed me, entered me through every pore, I had one last coherent thought. I would become the watcher in the beacon room, the presence in the lighthouse. Eventually, I would be the whisper calling someone else's name. 3 months later, Beth Anderson made her way up the path to Widow's Point Lighthouse, the new caretaker trailing behind her. "The last one didn't work out," she explained, not meeting the young woman's eyes. "Found him in the beacon room, though God knows how he got in there through the padlocked door. Completely unresponsive. Doctors say he may never recover." "How awful," the woman said, clutching her suitcase tighter. "Does that happen often?" Beth hesitated. "It's an isolated posting, not for everyone. But the Historical Society pays well for the right person." She unlocked the door to the keeper's quarters. "It's all yours until April, Ms. Levine." The new caretaker stepped inside, looking around appreciatively at the cozy space. "Please call me Sarah." "Sarah, then. The emergency numbers are by the phone, though service can be spotty during storms. Any questions before I head back to town?" Sarah shook her head, already feeling at home in the unusual space. After Beth left, Sarah began unpacking, humming to herself. She didn't notice the light on her desk flickering. 3 pulses, pause, 3 pulses. From the top of the spiral staircase, behind the securely padlocked door, a whisper floated down, "Sarah," and in the beacon room, pressed against the window overlooking the rocky shore, a face, too similar to Daniel's to be coincidence. watched with anticipation as its newest replacement settled in. The lighthouse would be kept. It always was. The first time I heard it, I thought it was the wind. A faint, rhythmic tapping against the window of the lighthouse keeper's quarters. 3 precise beats, then silence, then 3 more. I'd only been at Halberd Point for 2 days, having volunteered to catalog the historical artifacts before the Maritime Historical Society condemned the century-old structure. The lighthouse hadn't been operational since 1978, and 47 years of neglect had left it a crumbling testament to coastal history. That gentle tapping pulled me from my uneasy sleep just after midnight. Despite the early October chill, I crossed the worn floorboards barefoot, navigating around stacks of cataloging boxes to the small, salt-crusted window. Outside, the moon hung bloated and yellow over the restless Atlantic. No trees stood nearby to scrape against glass, no loose shutters to clatter in the breeze. Just the stark, weathered facade of the lighthouse itself, rising like a lonely sentinel against the vast darkness. The tapping had stopped, but as I pressed my palm against the cold glass, I felt it. A subtle vibration, as if something on the other side had just withdrawn its touch. I told myself it was nothing. Old buildings settle. The sea air plays tricks with sound. I returned to my cot, but sleep evaded me. My thoughts circling around the stories the locals had shared with thinly veiled amusement when I'd mentioned my assignment. How the last keeper had vanished without a trace in 1977. How boats still steered clear of Halberd Point, even decades after the light went dark. Just stories, I thought. The kind that cling to any old structure standing alone on a rocky promontory. Nothing to concern a rational mind in the 21st century. That was before the logbook started writing itself. I'd found the keeper's logbook my first day, a leather-bound volume with yellowed pages half filled with the meticulous records of Raymond Thorne, the missing keeper. His handwriting was tight and precise, recording weather conditions, passing vessels, and maintenance tasks up until November 12, 1977. The final entry simply read, "Light functioning normally. Heavy fog rolling in from northeast. Something in the fog." The logbook was my first priority for cataloging, so I'd left it open on the small desk near my cot. On my third morning at Halberd Point, I awoke to find fresh writing on the previously blank page. The fog returns. It remembers. The handwriting was unmistakably Thorne's. I'd been studying it for days, but the ink was still wet, glistening in the pale morning light. I slammed the book shut, heart hammering against my ribs. When I gathered the courage to open it again an hour later, the page was blank. I told myself I'd dreamed it. The isolation was getting to me. 3 miles from the nearest road, with only a temperamental satellite phone for emergencies, it was easy to let imagination run wild. I threw myself into my work, photographing and documenting the fascinating artifacts scattered throughout the lighthouse. Navigation instruments, weather logs, personal effects left behind by keepers long deceased. That night, the tapping returned. Louder, more insistent. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps. I ignored it, burying my head beneath my pillow. But then a new sound emerged. A scraping, as if something heavy was being dragged up the spiral staircase leading to the lantern room. The lantern room, which I'd locked before sunset because the glass was unreliable and a storm was brewing. I lay frozen, listening to the slow, deliberate thud scrape that ascended the metal steps. When it reached the top, a brilliant light flooded through the cracks around my door. A light so intense it seemed to bend around edges, seeking entrance like a living thing. It pulsed with the same rhythm as the tapping. 3 flashes, darkness, 3 flashes. I must have fallen asleep at some point, because I woke to silence and gray dawn light. Forcing myself to act normal, I climbed to the lantern room, telling myself there would be a logical explanation. The massive Fresnel lens, which hadn't held a working light in nearly half a century, was warm to the touch, its intricate prisms beaded with condensation as if it had been radiating heat through the night. On my 5th day, I found the photograph. I'd been cataloging a box of miscellaneous items from the storage room. Old tools, spare parts for the lamp mechanism, a few personal items likely belonging to Thorne. At the bottom, tucked inside a water-stained envelope, was a Polaroid photograph. It showed the lighthouse from about 50 yards out, presumably taken from a boat. The image quality was poor and faded, but you could clearly see a figure standing at the railing of the gallery deck, just outside the lantern room. The figure was featureless, almost translucent, but its posture conveyed a sense of rigid alertness, like a sentry at its post. What unsettled me most was the date stamp in the corner. March 22nd, 1981. 4 years after the lighthouse was decommissioned. 3 years after Thorne disappeared. That night, the tapping came from inside my room. I'd been dozing fitfully when the sound startled me awake. 3 sharp raps on the wooden footboard of my cot. The room was pitch black. The battery-powered lantern I'd left on had died. As my eyes adjusted, I could make out a denser patch of darkness at the foot of my bed, a void that seemed to absorb what little ambient light filtered through the window. "Who's there?" My voice emerged as a hoarse whisper. In response, the temperature plummeted. My breath clouded before my face, and the metal frame of the cot grew so cold it burned against my skin. The dark shape remained motionless, but I sensed a tension, a focused, penetrating regard that pressed against my consciousness like a physical weight. The air grew thick with the scent of salt water and something else, something organic and long decayed. A low humming began to fill the room, not a sound exactly, but a vibration that set my teeth on edge and made my eardrums throb painfully. Then it spoke. Not with a voice, but with pressure changes in the air that my brain somehow translated into words. "The light must never die." I ran. Scrambling from the cot, I fumbled for the door handle with numb fingers and burst into the narrow hallway. The bitter cold followed, nipping at my heels as I fled down the spiral staircase, taking the steps 2 and 3 at a time. I had nearly reached the bottom when my foot caught on something soft and yielding. I tumbled the last few steps, landing hard on the stone floor of the entrance hall. Dazed, I rolled over and looked back up the staircase. A trail of wet, viscous seaweed covered the steps I just descended, glistening in the darkness like a path of black tears. It hadn't been there when I'd gone up to bed. Outside, the night was clear and still. I sat on the rocky ground, back pressed against the outer wall of the lighthouse, until dawn broke over the horizon. Only then did I gather enough courage to return inside for my satellite phone and personal belongings. The phone was dead, not just out of battery, but scorched from the inside out, as if subjected to intense heat. My laptop had suffered the same fate, its screen a spiderweb of cracks, the plastic casing partially melted. I was alone with whatever had awakened at Halbert Point. Over the next 3 days, I witnessed the systematic dismantling of my rationality. The logbook filled itself each night with increasingly urgent entries, all in Thorne's handwriting. "Comes with the tide. It rises with the moon. The light is the only thing that holds it back. They don't understand. I called for help, but they think I'm mad. The supply boat won't come anymore. They can't see what gathers in the waves. God help me, I can see its face now. Objects moved when I wasn't looking. I would place my coffee mug on the desk, turn to retrieve a pen, and find the mug on the windowsill, its contents frozen solid despite the relative warmth of the room. Doors that I distinctly remembered closing would be wide open. Doors I'd left open would be locked tight. The spiral staircase was the worst. Each time I climbed it, I counted 52 steps to reach the lantern room. Each time I descended, I counted 67. On the 8th night, the light in the lantern room came alive again. Not the warm electric glow of a modern beacon, but an otherworldly blue-green luminescence that pulsed and writhed like something alive. It moved with purpose, its beam sweeping across the dark waters with precision. Each time it completed a rotation, I heard the tapping, now thunderously loud, reverberating through the entire structure. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. I ascended the spiral staircase that night, counting each step aloud as if the numbers could anchor me to reality. 52, 53, 54. I reached 73 before I finally emerged into the lantern room. The Fresnel lens was spinning slowly, though there was no mechanism to drive it. The light it emitted didn't come from any bulb or lamp I could identify. It simply existed, a coldly radiant presence that cast harsh, angular shadows across the curved walls. As I watched, transfixed, the beam swept across something in the water far below. Something vast and shapeless that momentarily interrupted the light's passage to the horizon. I pressed my face against the glass, straining to see what lay in the darkness beyond. The salt-crusted pane was cold against my skin, growing colder until I had to pull away, leaving behind a perfect impression of my features on the frosted glass. That's when I saw it. A small door in the floor of the lantern room, a door that hadn't been there during my previous inspections. It was made of tarnished bronze, its surface etched with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and flow when viewed from the corner of my eye. Common sense screamed at me not to open it. But common sense had abandoned this place long ago, and curiosity, that fatal human flaw, drove my trembling hands to grasp the recessed handle. The door opened with surprising ease, revealing not the spiral staircase I'd ascended, but a narrow shaft that plunged straight down into darkness. A ladder of corroded metal rungs descended along one wall, vanishing into the gloom below. The air that rose from the opening was not the expected mustiness of an enclosed space, but the fresh, briny scent of the open ocean. A physical impossibility given the lighthouse's construction. I should have sealed that door and fled. Instead, I found myself climbing onto the ladder, my movements no longer feeling entirely my own. The metal rungs were slick with moisture, forcing me to cling tightly as I made my slow descent into the impossible space beneath the lighthouse. I counted the rungs as I went. 20, 30, 50, far more than the physical height of the lighthouse could contain. The quality of darkness changed as I descended, becoming almost liquid in its density. The only illumination came from bioluminescent organisms that clung to the walls, tiny points of ghostly blue-green light that mirrored the beacon above. After what felt like hours, my feet touched solid ground. I stood in a circular chamber with walls of fitted stone, glistening with moisture. The room was bare except for a single object in its center, a wooden desk identical to the one in the keeper's quarters, complete with a leather-bound logbook. Seated at the desk was a figure. Not Thorn, as I'd half expected, but something that only approximated human form. A silhouette composed of shifting darkness and pinpricks of light, like a tear in reality revealing the night sky beyond. Its edges constantly fluctuated, as if it couldn't decide on a final shape. When it turned to face me, I saw that where a face should be was only a smooth, reflective surface like black glass. In it, I could see my own expression distorted by terror. The figure gestured to the logbook, which lay open on the desk. I approached, drawn forward by a compulsion I couldn't resist. The pages were filled with Thorn's handwriting, but the words were unlike anything I'd seen in the keeper's log above. The light is not to guide ships away from the rocks. The light is to keep them away from the shore. They've forgotten. They've all forgotten. Someone must remember. Someone must maintain the vigil. The last entry, written in fresh ink that gleamed wetly in the spectral light. I found a replacement. The vigil continues. The figure stood, its form rippling like dark water. It extended what might have been a hand toward me, a gesture both offering and demanding. In that moment, I understood with perfect clarity what had happened to Raymond Thorn, and why no trace of him had ever been found. He had never left his post. The tapping began again, 3 precise beats that I now recognized as a code, a signal to something waiting in the depths. The figure's reflective face tilted toward me expectantly. I backed away, shaking my head. "No," I whispered. "I'm not staying. I'm not becoming the keeper." The figure made no sound, but the disappointment, the hunger, radiated from it in palpable waves. The bioluminescent lights along the walls flared brightly, then winked out one by one, plunging the chamber into absolute darkness. I turned and groped blindly for the ladder, my fingers closing around empty air where it should have been. The stone floor beneath my feet grew slick and unsteady, tilting like the deck of a ship in heavy seas. From all around came the sound of rushing water, and with it, the unmistakable sensation of something vast rising from below. I screamed then, a sound that was swallowed by the darkness as completely as Raymond Thorne had been. In that moment of pure terror, a blinding light cut through the blackness, illuminating a scene that my mind still refuses to fully process. Walls that were no longer stone but writhing, translucent flesh, a ceiling that pulsed with rhythmic contractions, and countless appendages reaching toward me with terrible purpose. The light, the lighthouse beam, swept across this nightmare tableau, momentarily driving back the horror. In that instant of reprieve, my hand found the lowest rung of the ladder, which had reappeared as suddenly as it had vanished. I climbed with desperate speed, the metal cutting into my palms as something cold and sinuous wrapped around my ankle. I kicked violently, connecting with something solid that released me with a sound like the sighing of the tide. The ladder seemed endless, each rung exactly like the last, until finally I emerged gasping through the bronze door into the lantern room. The door slammed shut behind me, its surface now smooth and featureless, indistinguishable from the rest of the floor. The Fresnel lens continued its steady rotation, the otherworldly light still pulsing in its precise rhythm. 3 flashes. Pause. 3 flashes. Dawn found me huddled in a corner of the lantern room, my body trembling uncontrollably. When the first rays of sunlight penetrated the salt-crusted glass, the unnatural light finally died, and the lens grew still. I fled Halberd Point that morning, abandoning my equipment, my notes, everything but the clothes on my back and the keeper's logbook tucked under my arm. I walked the 3 miles to the road and hitchhiked to the nearest town, where I babbled my story to increasingly skeptical authorities. They found nothing, of course. A search of the lighthouse revealed no hidden chambers, no bronze door, no evidence of anything supernatural. They attributed my experience to carbon monoxide poisoning from the old heating system, or possibly tainted water from the lighthouse's ancient plumbing. The Maritime Historical Society canceled the cataloging project. The lighthouse was deemed structurally unsound and scheduled for demolition. But I know the truth. I've seen what waits beneath Halberd Point, what has always waited there, held at bay only by the vigilance of lonely men tending an unnatural light. I understand now why ships give the point such a wide berth, guided by instincts older than reason. 2 nights ago, the tapping started again. 3 precise beats against my apartment window 17 miles inland. Last night, I found the logbook open on my desk, though I'd locked it in a drawer before going to bed. A new entry in Thorne's handwriting. The light is dying. The tide is rising. Return to your post. I don't know how much longer I can resist the call. My dreams are filled with the rhythmic flash of that spectral light, the endless descent of the ladder, the thing with my reflection for a face waiting patiently for my return. Sometimes, in the darkest hours before dawn, I catch myself tapping against my bedroom wall. 3 precise beats, pause, 3 more, sending a signal, waiting for a response. The demolition of Halberd Point Lighthouse is scheduled for next week. When the charges blow and the ancient stone crumbles into the sea, what will emerge from the waters? What will come ashore, no longer held back by the keeper's vigil? I should warn someone. I should shout the truth from the rooftops. But who would believe me? Besides, it's growing harder to remember why I should resist. The vigil is important. The light must never die. Someone must tend the beacon. Someone must keep watch against the rising tide. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. They're calling me home.